Ready? All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Truckee Donner Public Utility District. It's the first meeting of the year, 2023, and it is January 18th, and it is 6 o'clock. Shauna, roll call, please. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year to you as well. Thank you. Director Finn?
Here.
Director Harris?
Here.
Vice President Laliotis?
Here.
President Pender?
I'm here.
The record will note that Director Aguirre is out.
Thank you. All right, Pledge of Allegiance. If everyone could please stand. Krista, do you want to lead us?
Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. Okay, public comment. Time set aside for the public to address the matter, or the board on any matter not on the agenda tonight. So is there any public comment tonight?
No, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, director update. Kim, we'll start with you.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Is it on? Okay, gotcha, thanks. I always like to take this opportunity to thank all of our employees, our crews for working out in the snow, for customer service, for I'm sure fielding many calls that come in about
lost electricity, what's going on with water and everything. Because this time of year, it does get a little dicey with the weather. But I do appreciate all the hard work everybody puts forth in trying to communicate what's going on, the Instagram page, Facebook page, and all of that. So thank you very much to staff.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to play around with the outage management page, which was pretty cool. When you were seeing posts from next door and things about outages in Taladana, you go right to that page and you can see all the pins dropped on the map. So it was super cool. And as Director Harris said, thank you to our staff, everyone who worked out there. I think we got lucky in how these series of storms rolled through that crews were able to keep on top of the outages, and we didn't have any significant damage. And then shout out to just all the other public agencies in Truckee and Tahoe area for doing an outstanding job with snow removal, keeping up with what's going on, holiday weekends. It's just, it always seems to be the perfect timing. So, and the patience of our customers, our visitors, and everyone who, everyone got along, I feel like, pretty well. And we got through. We've got some great skiing conditions out there. It's just, we're set up for the water year in pretty good shape. So just kudos to all the hard work out there.
Nice. Krista.
Yeah, what they both said. I think that's very much, I've got great feedback from the community through this series of storms and over the holidays about how responsive the PUD has been this season and how little outages there have been, how few outages there have been, and how little it's affected our, daily running of things. So amazing job on the operations side. We really do appreciate, this whole community appreciates it. A few other things. Happy New Year. Welcome back. While we were gone, I did attend the Climate Transformation Alliance's third meeting. So I just wanted to give you all an update, my board members, of what we talked about. We had an educational session on, this is the really exciting part, California Government Code 4217.10-18. I know. It was actually very interesting. It talks about how government agencies, for our procurement process for energy efficiency programs, can be bundled together and more easily pass through the permitting processes and perhaps get money. So that was a very timely for the group that is together for the Climate Transformation Alliance, which is a greenhouse gas reductions collaboration that we're putting together for those who are just now entering the conversation. We also talked about some adaptation planning grant opportunities that the CTA might have ahead of us to help us fund the Alliance for the next year. We also had an update on proposal for the Truckee Tahoe Building Decarbonization Program. We might have a donor, a sponsor, and a donor to match funds for decarbonizing our building stock and building capacity, people to help us do that, do those services. And we also kicked off a new idea, the Climate Transformation Accelerator, which is something that we're hoping to brainstorm projects, bring them before the group, vote on what we think might be effective, and pair that with grant money opportunities to move them forward. So that was, in a nutshell, that 2-hour meeting. I will be most likely bringing back to us, to you, another ask, but it'll be in a real meeting and agendized and all that sort of stuff. But that's still hanging out there. So if you're on the edge of your seats wondering what's going on with the Climate Transformation Alliance, I will be bringing that up to you relatively soon. And I think that is it for me for director updates. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Great to be here. We have power, and it was, I think, a very successful holiday time for the district. So really appreciate that and everyone working hard. And I missed changes to the agenda. So Brian, we'll wrap that up with general manager update. Are there any changes?
Yeah, thank you, President. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
President Bender, we have one recommended change at the board's discretion. We have a pretty robust public participation here this evening and a couple of consultants that have traveled from out of state. And so the interest of respecting their time, staff is recommending we bring item number 14 to the forefront and place it in front of the consent calendar if the board would like to.
I'm thumbs up with that. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll have one change. We'll move item number 14 right after general manager update.
Very good, I appreciate that. In terms of general manager updates, I want to echo the sentiments of the board. The district did very well here locally in managing through the recent storm cycles with really no significant infrastructural damage, some minor, incidents with trees or branches and wires, and maybe some cross-harm replacements, but compared to what we experienced in December of 21, we did very well this time. And, we attribute that to a couple of factors. One, a lot of the hard work the staff has done out in the field in vegetation management to clear out some of those high-risk trees and branches, the continued pole replacement program and robust infrastructure, and a little bit of luck. We had some weather conditions that were quite, they continued there for quite a long time, and there was a lot of snowfall, great for the water storage in the Sierra, but the snow, in terms of its conditions, really didn't implement too much damage on us. And so I want to, again, echo the sentiments. The crews did amazing jobs across the entire organization, and it was an opportunity for us to really evaluate. We do a kind of a field analysis, and then back here at the office, do additional analysis on how the OMS system is performing in terms of our own management of the outages, but also the notifications out to the public. And so, for lack of a better term, it is somewhat of a smart system, so to speak. And so as we experience these outages, we can come back and dial things in so that they're even more accurate, more timely, and have more valuable information for the public to understand what's going out there in their community. And it also enhances our response times in terms of resource deployment. We can prioritize certain outages based on the impact on the community and the ability to restore those more effectively. So all around, I think things are moving in a direction of higher efficiency, more resiliency, and more reliability, which everybody, I believe, is supportive of. A couple of other items. This seems to be the season for strategic planning. We have an item later on this evening to talk about that, but in terms of our Director Finn talked about our participation with the CTA. The district also participates with the Truckee-Tahoe Workforce Housing Agency. I sit on that board representing the district, and we just adopted the strategic plan for that organization. So it's very exciting times for the Truckee-Tahoe Workforce Housing Agency, and look for Emily Vitus, the executive director, to come to this board and present on some of the plans that are coming out of that strategic plan and what the next couple of years look like. We had discussions this afternoon or this morning that, you can categorize it as a housing issue or a housing crisis, but it's also a workforce sustainability challenge in terms of affordable housing for our workforce, not just for the PUD, but all of the organizations and employers here in the Truckee-Tahoe region. So exciting work there. Unfortunately, because of scheduling conflicts, Mr. Poncelet and myself couldn't attend the NCPA Strategic Issues Conference. It's happening right now as we speak, but we were able to send staff there. And this is a robust conference schedule to evaluate and have some panel discussions on some of the challenges, not just in Northern California, but regionally in resource adequacy, long-term energy planning, and clean renewable energy generation. So we'll look forward to future updates on that. Our staff is participating in a strategic panel on the Advanced Clean Fleet rule that's in its, some of its final stages of development and potential adoption. And our role in that panel is to really articulate some of the challenges that the rule presents to organizations like ourselves in the Sierra, Nevada, climate and geography in terms of the new clean fleet rules and how they apply to our heavy fleet and medium fleet infrastructure. I want to thank the coalition that was established by all the Tahoe and Truckee public agencies. We share common goals and share common challenges, and it was really a collaborative effort to give this region a voice at the state legislative level. So another shining example of collaborative voices working in tandem for the better interest of our community's safety and long-term resiliency. And I'll leave it at that. We have a very robust schedule, a great presentation on one of the board's strategic initiatives. We have our consulting firm that has traveled and dared to navigate the gauntlet of commercial travel, airline travel in these circumstances. So really appreciate them coming and also appreciate the public attendance, because this is an opportunity for information gathering, discussions, and public comments. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Brian. So with this one change to the agenda tonight, we'll move on to the workshop. Agenda item number 14, community-wide broadband initial scoping study results. Hanselite.
All right, can you hear me? Good evening, President Bender and members of the board. I am very pleased to present this workshop item. This is going to be a very informative workshop, if I could be so bold as to say, with a lot of information being presented by our consultant, Uptown Services. We are going to be shuffling seats here as we come along, and so those transition points will be an opportunity to pause, ask questions. If you have questions along the way, please feel free to bring them up while they're fresh. I'm going to do a little introduction on the history and how we got here. We have Dave Stockton from Uptown Services is going to talk about the demand analysis, market analysis, and customer demand survey that we conducted. Neil Shaw from Uptown will be talking about our assets and the engineering and preliminary design and cost estimates that were made. And then he's going to shuffle back to Dave, who's going to talk about some of the business models that are out there that could be considered or studied, and then talk about some of the financing opportunities, and then end with next steps and recommendations.
Recording in progress.
I'll then come back and finish with, the fiscal impact and recommendation slide, at which point it would be fully open for discussion. All right. So the board adopted the 2021 to 2024 strategic plan on May 19th, 2021. Strategic plan development was September 20th through May 21st. There was significant community outreach and participation in that effort. 4 board initiatives came out of that: undergrounding of overhead electric lines, community broadband, local clean renewable generation, and 100% clean renewable. The board established a standing committee for the community broadband initiative on June 16th of 2021. The committee collaboratively arrived at recommendations presented to the board on March 2nd, 2022. And at a broad level, the recommendations were broadband in Truckee matters, TDPUD should take a leadership role, partner for success, and fiber is the future. The board broadband committee suggested next steps included engage consultants in developing a strategic broadband plan for the entire Truckee community. Consultants must have PUD rural community funding and broadband business model experience. And so that's what you're seeing come into fruition here tonight. The board feedback and direction at that March meeting included staff should create a request for proposal to pursue an initial scoping study, which would include a market and customer demand survey, understanding of district assets, operations, and partnerships, evaluation of potential business models, identification of potential funding, and then recommendation of potential models or projects to pursue. So so that's what we went ahead and did. The general manager created a community-wide broadband GM task force to help inform the creation of that request for proposal, and then a subset of that committee served on the scoring committee in the selection of the consultant. And, that was also part of the board's direction, was let's keep the community involved. So the TDPUD Community-Wide Broadband Initial Scoping Study, RFP, I'll call it scoping study from now on, I promise, was developed collaboratively by staff in the GM task force. We did some virtual benchmarking via Zoom with key industry leaders, sister utilities, munis, and associations to really understand who's done this, get their RFPs, understand what was important, what worked and didn't. We did develop a list of known consultants that it went out to that was approaching 15 by the time we were done, and that was a big part of our benchmarking effort, was to create that list. And we issued an RFP on June 10th, 2022. Uptown Services was viewed most advantageous, and the TDPUD board awarded a contract on August 3rd to Uptown Services. So Uptown Services has completed the study and are here to present the results. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Stockton, and I'm going to pull up your PowerPoint. And then button for up and down.
Okay, well, good evening, President Bender and council members, district board members. I'm Dave Stockton, and I will be kicking this off. As you know, also Neil Shaw is here with us tonight as well. So in terms of the content, we've got about 100 slides, so we will move a little bit brisky through some of this, but as Stephen mentioned, please interrupt with questions. We'd be happy to pause and explain or address any issues or questions that come up. In terms of the scope, we really covered the 6 tasks that you see here. So task 1 is pretty robust in terms of the market research survey that we completed there. I'll be going through all of that. And then Neil will cover tasks 2 and 3 that mostly deal with the technology, the assets that are in place today, what kind of high-level design would be required to bring fiber into the area in a more robust way. And then I'll come back up and address tasks 4 through 6 involving funding, looking high-level at some business models, and then also looking at very preliminary results of an RFI that we conducted as well. So starting with kind of the market situation, I want to briefly just outline and summarize what's available on the market today here in the community for broadband services. And so let's start with what we'll call the legacy incumbent providers. So that would be Optimum, which formerly was Suddenlink and is owned by Altice USA. You'll probably hear us use all 3 of those labels tonight in different ways. But they are the local cable TV or cable broadband provider. And then we have AT&T as well, which offers DSL services. And then also, as you're very familiar, Plymouth Sierra Telecom. And I think the key takeaway here is you do see that Optimum has deployed what's called in the industry DOCSIS 3.1, which is a cable modem technology standard that does allow them to offer gig service. So you can see that there, 940 megs downstream, 35 meg up. So it's highly asymmetrical, but they can offer that. And it's $80 to $90 a month, depending on your particular situation. And that's important. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but that piece is important relative to funding options. There are some very, very large federal grant programs now, but given the situation with technology and DOCSIS 3.1 being deployed, this community would be considered served by the FCC, and that removes some of the grant funding opportunities that we'll talk about when we get to that portion. Then we have what we call the alternative residential market, which would be fixed wireless. So a good example here in the community would be Oasis, of course. And you see lower download speeds, a little bit higher in pricing, and that's just a function of the technology compared to cable modem service. You also have Sky Fiber, and you have Starlink as well, which is the Elon Musk initiative. And then in terms of the commercial internet market, you've got the legacy providers. You can see Altice's pricing there. Similar offerings, a little bit higher price compared to residential. And then, the same legacy players are also serving the commercial market. So let's dive into the survey. So the survey, we played a role in the survey at the outset in terms of designing it and then interpreting results and creating a report. But we really rely on professional research firms, and you can see their names here, to really conduct the research. And these are firms that only do market research. So we're hands off from that, and we rely on the experts to give us a very professional analysis when conducting research. And in terms of how it was executed, we completed 400 phone surveys, and then we supplemented that with online email invitations to take the survey online. And we had just over 2,200 participants take the online. So a very robust sample overall. And we also, during the survey, for those that were taking the survey from home, asked at the end of the survey if that participant would agree to take a speed test. And we received 920 data points on completed speed tests as well. So because of the robust sample, our error term is 1.7%, which is quite low. We did offer the survey in both English and Spanish. And then we did some things, I'll talk about quotas on the next slide, but we also did some fairly standard research techniques around screening to simply remove as much bias as possible from the survey results. So starting off with just the sample demographics, you can see household income on the bottom left there. We had 16% of survey participants refuse to state income. That's fairly common. And it skews a little bit higher in income, and that's also common as well. You tend to skew a little bit towards higher income in surveys compared to the census, which is in green. And in terms of the sample demographics up in the upper right, you can see that age is a factor in refusing to state income, and that affects some of the outcome as well. In terms of age, on the bottom right, we weight that. So you can see the raw data, the raw sample in the red, and like all surveys, it tends to skew higher in age compared to the universe or the census data. And then we correct that back through weighting, and we weight it back down to, before we run the crosstab analysis, to reflect the universe again, using the census data. Okay, so let's talk about what people are doing today in the community with broadband. We'll start off there. We'll talk about satisfaction. We'll end up talking about purchase intent and other factors that are important to you. So in the upper right-hand corner, you can see that 98% of households that we talk to subscribe to an internet service at home. Those that don't, on the lower right, the main reason is affordability. And we will see a little bit of that theme tonight. In terms of market share, in the lower left, no surprise, it's Suddenlink. That does reflect national patterns of cable modem having much more market share compared to telco or DSL. But Suddenlink has strong market share here, as you can see. AT&T follows at 9%, and then you can see some of the other alternative providers beyond that. So fairly dominated market. If we look at demographics and what type of internet people are using, if you look on the right by age, not a real discernible pattern, but there is on the left with income, and we've seen this in other markets too. So lower income households tend to be less likely to subscribe to a fixed or a wireline internet service. And so you can see the differences there. And we'll see some similar patterns as we look at income throughout the survey. We asked about spending levels. We did have, so on the left side, we had 21% state that they were in a service bundle, so they couldn't specifically identify what they're paying for internet. But of those that could, the average monthly spending is reported to be $78. Then if we look on the right again and break that out by household income, you do see that the average spending is increasing with income. And so lower income homes are tending to spend less and, in fact, undersubscribing, if you will. Then we asked about stated download speed. So this is all before the speed test, of course. But we asked what speed they're subscribing to. So on the left chart, you can see 1 in 4 households don't know. That's actually quite common. And then among those that do, we've got 38% that state that they're subscribing to at least 100 meg. And then again, if we look at internet access speed, which does closely correlate with spending, of course, lower income households are subscribing to lower tiers, as you can see. We asked a question about the perception of what they're receiving in speed compared to what they are supposed to be subscribing to. So we asked, to what extent do you agree or disagree with the following statement? I am receiving the advertised download speed I'm paying for on my home internet connection. And we had 1 in 2 households agree with that statement. So as far as speed test results, as I mentioned, we had 920 tests. The median download speed observed in those tests was 108 meg, and the median upload was 18 meg. And of course, this is influenced by what tier they're subscribing to. It doesn't speak to the absolute maximum of the technology. And then you can see how that breaks out across the different speed thresholds that we have on this chart. Okay, so we've got some observations at, 600 on up, but not many. And that could just be a reflection of the people not subscribing at that high level. But then we looked at the stated speed versus the observed speed test result. And this is somewhat interesting in that once you get to 100 meg and above, the stated significantly outweighs the observed from the speed test result. And of course, as we all know, that could be one of two things or both things. It could either be that households are over-perceiving what they're subscribing to. They think they're subscribing to a higher tier than they are. Or the performance isn't there in the network, or both. Then we asked, as the final question in the survey, how does the download speed test result compare with the download speed you're subscribing to from your internet provider? And we had 46% of survey participants state that the test result is lower. Let's now move into satisfaction scores. So here we asked about internet satisfaction, and we asked about 5 different attributes: service, price, reliability, speed consistency, and available speed. And then we asked for an overall scoring. And all of this was rated on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being most satisfied. And you can see the mean scores by the different dimensions that we asked about. These compare below average to the markets that we have been doing these studies in. I think this is our 44th survey of this nature over a long period of time. The other way we look at this is we can see what percent of households are truly satisfied and rating the service a 9 or a 10. And you can see those percentages there as well. So overall, only 8% in the community are, thrilled with their internet service. So again, lower scores than we typically see. We also asked, to what extent do you agree or disagree with the following statement? I'm currently able to get the internet speed I want from my home. And we had 42% of households state that they feel they don't have that. They either strongly disagree or somewhat disagree with that statement. We asked about attribute importance. This one's been interesting. It's been 20 years we've been doing this. Internet speed was never number 2 20 years ago. It is now. Reliability is always number 1, but internet speed is above price, above customer service. And then, lo and behold, the newest thing coming up rapidly is not having a data cap. So I think we've all been trained relative to our wireless or cell plan service to be aware of data caps, and they have started emerging more among the private sector providers. So, for example, Comcast uses them, even though Comcast isn't here. Altice does not. But the customer base and households in general are becoming aware of what that means. We asked about the area that could most be improved for broadband. And so the options are lower price, increased internet speed, reliability, et cetera, as you can see. And the total sample's in red. And then I also, through crosstabs, isolated just those survey participants that indicated that they would definitely subscribe to an offering if it were brought to the market. And you can see that in orange. But among the total sample, we had 11% said nothing could be improved. And then we had a really close tie across lower prices, increased speed, and improved reliability. Okay? And reliability is coming in stronger than we typically see there. We see a lot of lower price combined with increased speed. So that's a little bit different than what we typically see. And this is somewhat influenced by age. So younger households tend to place more importance on speed, probably not a surprise. Older households tend to place more importance on lower prices. We asked about the uses of internet, and so I'll talk about some applications, common applications, et cetera. But we started off by asking about what the ideal speed would be for that household. And we had 38% of households state their ideal speed would be 1 gig or higher. And among those that, again, would be definitely interested in something like this, that increases pretty dramatically to 56%, 51%. And I'll talk about the price points that we're testing when we get to that part. And then on the right, we have the importance of upload speed. And again, this is the kind of perception that if you asked the same question 5 or 10 years ago, it would have been a much different result. But households now do certainly understand the importance of upload speed. We asked about digital applications. So you can see the list that we presented across the bottom of the chart. And even getting through pandemics and everything else, the social connection and entertainment applications still come in as the most important to households today. Working from home is there at 4.0, even with shopping online on Amazon. But some of the other more advanced and specific applications are lower in importance at this point in time. This is very consistent with what we've seen in other communities. Let's talk about affordability. So just briefly, I want to talk about the Affordable Connectivity Program, just because it's something that's happening now. It was funded through the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, but it's $14 billion in federal funding to subsidize internet service providers offering internet service to lower-income households. And it works very simply. It's whatever tier that customer takes, if they're income eligible, they get $30 off the monthly price. And that $30 is paid to the service provider via this federal fund program. And it has to be offered across every internet tier. So the provider can't just set up a really low-speed tier that no one wants and say that's our tier. Every tier they offer to a residential household has to qualify for that $30 discount. So we want to explore the awareness of that, because certainly one issue with this program has been a lack of awareness. And we see the same thing in your case. But we started off to just ask, do people participate in that program? And understanding affordability in general. So one of the things we talked about is, does the household feel like they subscribe to a lower speed internet service than they would like to in order to save money? And you can see there the total samples in orange, and we had 48% of households either agree, strongly agree, or somewhat agree with that statement. And that's total sample. And then we can look at and isolate lower income. So the blue is less than 25,000, and the green is 25 to 50,000 in income. And you can see, of course, as you would expect, that percentage shoots up even further. But it's been surprising to us, because we've been asking about this particular affordability topic for a couple of years now, and it's fairly common to see a surprisingly large percentage of households state that they're undersubscribing for budgetary reasons. Okay, this is a slide I thought I was on. All right. So in terms of actual participation in these subsidy programs, it's very, very low. We only found 1% in the survey. And as I mentioned earlier, we undersampled on lower income, so please keep that in mind. And then, we also asked about, on the left, does your internet service provider offer a discount program based on income? And we had 7% of households say yes, and the answer is 100%, should be 100%. So again, like most markets we're in, very low awareness of this program. So in terms of testing and moving into purchase intent and understanding potential revenues, we tested 2 price points and we used a cell design in the survey. So half of the survey participants were placed in what we call cell A and the other half in cell B. And for cell A, they were tested on subscribing to 1 gig for $70 a month, and cell B was $90 a month. And then we did ask about multi-gig tiers as well, and we carried that cell design through to the 2 gig tier at 110 and 120, and then we asked about 4 gig as well, as you can see. And then on the right, you can see the ACP eligible price points, which reflect that $30 discount. So moving into purchase intent, I'd like to start with provider preference. So before being presented any options or anything like that, we did ask about just qualitatively, if you will, among the following list of potential providers, who would you prefer to receive broadband service from? Total samples in orange. If you look on the far right, 37% did not have an opinion on brand preference. And then we had 25% state it would be a community-owned agency. And then it drops off pretty rapidly from there. So actually, if you look over on the right, the next up is 10%, which would be a provider new to the area, beat out all the incumbents. If we look again, crosstabs only at those that would definitely subscribe, the community-owned agency preference jumps up to 41%. So in determining purchase intent, we ask if a person would subscribe for a gig service at either the $70 price point or the $90 price point. And the options are there in the middle in the legend, and that's called what's known as a 5-point Likert scale. And so the options are I definitely would subscribe, I probably would, might not, probably would not, and definitely would not. And you can see the outcomes there. So as expected, that $70, $90 range, it does happen to be, price elastic at that range. I believe it's 1.3. And so we had stronger purchase intent stated at the $70 price point than the 90. And then for those that said they definitely or probably would, we asked about their primary reason. And 39% said more capacity, followed by lower price and a new provider. But, overall, we had 68% to 58% say they definitely or probably would purchase depending on the price point. So pretty strong purchase intent. And then we asked about the same thing at the end after we determined whether or not a household would qualify that was taking the survey for the ACP program based on their income and their household size. And you can see the outcome there. So not real strong, but a couple things I'll point out. One is that we've got low sample sizes here, especially at that $60 price point on the right. We're down to a sample of 34. So we've got to be very careful with interpretation here. The one on the left, we happen to have 72. It's just how the cells work it out. But the other thing I will state that we've seen this in all communities, and I don't know if there's just some skepticism or what, but there isn't the huge jump in purchase intent when you present a $30 lower price point with this program. So I'm not sure what that's about, but we are consistently seeing that. One thing that we do is after we take those purchase intent statements that I just presented, we apply what we call overstatement adjustment. And this is a technique that empirically over time has proven out, comes out of the packaged goods sector. I think companies like Procter & Gamble pioneered it. And just noticing over time that when you ask something in research about purchase intent or potential market share, that you tend to overstate what actually happens when someone has to take out their wallet later. And so we factored down the purchase intent as stated, and the way we do that is we take 70% of a definitely would response, 30% of probably would, and 10% of might not. So it's conservative, but that's important. You gotta be careful not to overstate revenue potential. And when we apply that and look at the different cells, we can see for $70 1 gig, we have a forecasted take rate of just over 40%. And then that drops down when the price point goes up by that $20 to 90 to 31%. And so in terms of revenue maximization, at least at this point, the recommendation would be the $70 price point. We did test multi-gig tiers. And again here, Just like other communities, there's a certain percentage of households that want to go beyond a gig. And the industry is moving in that direction, both in the incumbent sector as well as the municipal or public sector. And so you've got a range of households that do want to go above, as you can see. And that increases what the acronym here is ARPU, average revenue per user. And so even when you say it's going to be $70 a month for a gig because you're offering multi-gig tiers at higher price points, your ARPU is above $70, and same thing on the other side. If we benchmark this purchase intent result, we'd have to focus, this goes back a way, you can see we're going back to 2003 here. But in more recent history, in the circled area, we've been testing $70 for a gig for a while now, and you're on the far right there with that red square. We're kind of confusing this with video and phone, and really it's about broadband anymore. So, but you can see within that highlighted rectangle that 40% take rate, forecasted take rate, compares very favorably to what we see. And we're in some very rural markets where, that one that's above 50%, that's a market without any cable modem service whatsoever. So this all isn't really comparable, but a relative, subjective comparison would tell us that this is strong demand here compared to what we typically see. Okay, I won't summarize the findings, but we've got this in the full report. Okay, I'll turn it over to Neil.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I'm Neil Shaw, and I focus on technology design and engineering for the firm. So now what I want to talk about is looking at the PUD assets and how they would apply to a broadband enterprise or broadband project that you might want to partake in. So when you look at task 2, we're going to do an inventory analysis of the PUD assets, and then also look at the assessment of last mile technologies. So there's a lot of technologies out there that could serve the purposes of what your goals are, and we kind of compare and contrast what those options might be. So in terms of the inventory of district infrastructure, we looked at this from a number of different sources. So we had GIS layers, we talked to staff, and so we kind of did an amalgamation of all those data sources, and here's the inventory. So we'll go through this and look at what do these mean? What does this information mean to a broadband enterprise? The first thing we look at is the electric poles. Okay, traditionally, the cost to construct a system is much less in an aerial environment than it is in an underground environment, especially when the soil conditions contain cobble or solid rock like they do here. And so when we look at your poles and interviewed staff and really tried to dig down on if you were to use the poles in an aerial construction mode to hang fiber, what would need to be done to those poles to make them ready for using them in the fiber operation, fiber build. So the average cost comes out to be $14,000 and change between distribution and secondary poles, with the total cost of around $84 million. So that translates with the overhead footage on a per foot basis, that translates to about $125 a foot, which begins to look a lot like an underground construction project until you take into account the soil conditions here. So that's the bad news. The good news is that you've got a large amount of spare conduits, both mirroring your primary electric circuits and in new builds as a separate broadband network. And so out of the 1,400 and change services that are fed from primary underground facilities, almost 1,100 of those services are passed in the street by spare conduit. And so you would need, and 318 or so are not, so they would need new construction in the street, but you would still need to install handholds and vaults. And we talk about the cost implications in task 3 later. I won't get into this in a lot of detail other than to say that the the radio transmitters and tower sites that the PUD operates for their electric operations and water operations would be very important to a wireless deployment here. And so that would be good. And of course, the fiber system is very robust, and the 5-year plan for the fiber network would definitely add value to a future broadband project. And certainly the collaboration going forward of the fiber plans with the potential fiber broadband play would be really important to take into account. So when we look at the types of technologies that could be overlaid to serve the needs that Dave's identifying in the research and that the community wants from a policy perspective, the broadband capacity requirements have changed. So we did our first study back in 2003, and that was when 100 meg was blowing the doors off of everything. And then when we deployed in Longmont 5 years ago, a gig was the equivalent of 100 meg. And now, as Dave explained, we're seeing multi-gig expectations. And eventually, we're going to see multi-10 gig expectations within the next 10 years. And in reality, 100% fiber network is the only way to get there, according to those thresholds and those benchmarks. However, you do have wireless systems that can also play a part, and we kind of put those into two categories. First would be a macro cell wireless system, which is like what Oasis appears to be offering, which is one tower or just a couple towers over a large swath of geography, and then transmitters on the tower, and then at the house or at the business, you have a more powerful transmitter that can reach up and see the tower in the middle of town. The issues with that is that as the rate sheet showed for those folks, they're going to be in the 100 meg or so range for traditional wireless macro cell wireless systems. But as technology is kind of catching up, and they are going to be able to offer higher grade services, but not the gig services that we're looking at here with fiber. Then the other thing is the microcell wireless systems, the 5G. Those are also coming of age, and they also have some caveats listed with them. So when we look at the electric utility applications that could be supported by a broadband deployment, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this other than to say that just like you were talking about earlier in terms of your outage management capabilities and all the things that you have that you can see what's going on in the system today, a lot of that is the outcome of excellent planning and deployment of advanced utility systems, both on the monitoring side and the automation side, and in the grid, smart grid systems, including AMI and things like that. So the utility is doing a great job of that, and fiber is only going to improve what they can do and in a shorter amount of time. So when we look at what technologies might overlay to solve some of these problems, the first thing we're going to look at is what is currently being deployed today. Now, this is a bit of an eye chart map, but the simplest way to look at it is the blue dots represent service locations of the PUD, and the magenta, or pink, represents where Optimum has deployed DOCSIS 3.1, which is pretty much a gig service, okay, downstream, not upstream. And when you look at that, this is where we come up with the numbers, and the FCC and the California Broadband Office say, independent of test results, in reality, this area is served. And the actual statistics would be 204 service locations are underserved out of almost 12,000. And so that's an interesting factoid. But when we look at, so now let's look at what it's going to cost to what are the implications of the PUD inventory and some of the things that we found when we looked at like the poles and the conduits and things. So we can't really get over the issue that the aerial outside plant environment is not conducive to building another wired infrastructure system here, just because of the pole make-ready costs and being $84 million on their own. Underground construction costs is generally prohibitive, especially where your soil conditions are as rocky as they are here. The good news is that you don't really have a lot of that new underground construction based on the spare conduit that you can use. And so, but instead of just talking about this qualitatively, we did sample designs to understand what that would actually look like for you as an entire district across your service area. If you have any questions on the architecture, I can get into it, but the main takeaway from this is that the system that we'd be looking at deploying for a fiber optic to the home system or a fiber to the premise system, all the active electronics would be housed either in a shelter, one or two shelters in the entire service area, and at the customer's home. So everything in between that, the equipment shelter and the home equipment is all passive. There's nothing that's powered in the field, which helps a lot with obviously power consumption as well as reliability. So when we look at trying to come up with a broad gauge capital estimate of what it would cost to build a fiber to the home system, and we'll also look at wireless, we factored in cost assumptions that we could find from our work here on the West Coast and also talking to staff. And so these are the numbers that we used. And then we worked with staff to come up with representative areas that when we completed the designs for these areas, we could say, okay, let's say Tahoe Donner, we completed that design, the cost is X dollars per home passed. That represents 10% of the service area. So then we can come up with the weighted average to build out the entire service area for fiber to the home. Okay, so these are the areas, these are the sample design areas, some overhead, some underground, some mobile home parks. And so we'll go through what each one looks like, and then I'll have a table at the end that will show how they compare and contrast. So this is Donner Lake aerial. It's a front lot construction. Another aerial front lot in Tahoe Donner, a little bit less dense. Prosser Lake View, two service areas, rear lot construction. And then Gray's Crossing. Gray's Crossing has an abundance of spare conduit in the system. The GIS clearly says where it is. And so we did a sample design here, assuming spare conduit, and then having to place the new vaults and pedestals there. And then we also did one to show what it would cost if that spare conduit wasn't there, so that we could model those neighborhoods that didn't have spare conduit in the road. And then, of course, the Village Green and Donner Creek, the mobile home communities, and the issues around that relative to the construction, fairly expensive because of all the hard surface involved. So real quickly, when we look at, just to give you a sense of just the cost to build the system, not including make-ready of the poles and everything else, you can see that everything, that the top three are very similar, $1,300 to $1,400 per passing. Village Green and Donner Creek, they're $7,000 per passing. Gray's Crossing because of all the underground construction at $100 a foot. Gray's Crossing with the spare conduit is less than the aerial, but Gray's Crossing, if you didn't have spare conduit, is 13 times what it would be if you, the flip side. So when we take that into account, add the aerial make-ready, construction management, everything involved, system design and engineering, we're coming up to over $116 million, or about $8,700 per home passed. So I know that you like Dave's presentation better. Okay, so one thing about technology is that it's kind of a three-legged stool. There's performance, like how great is this going to be? There's cost and there's its lifespan, okay? So obviously fiber to the premise is the cat's meow in terms of performance, and it lives a super long life, but it's really expensive, especially, when you're dealing with outside plant costs that are so expensive here. On the flip side, wireless is much less expensive, decent performance, but you may have to replace it 5 or 7 years. Okay, so we want to look at wireless. We want to kind of give you a compare and contrast. I'm going to jump to the system that we looked at and modeled is a new system that's been introduced. It's coming out of pilot phase and being deployed now. It's called Tirana. And it's kind of a hybrid macro slash micro cell approach. And so what we did was we worked with Tirana. We looked at where your wireless sites were, and then we did propagation analysis using the Tirana equipment to understand that if we deployed, there's 9 base stations there. So these base stations would be on an antenna or on a tower, and they would have 4 sectors on them. So it would look kind of like a wireless or kind of like a cell tower a little bit, but smaller. Then we ran simulations using propagation software that allowed us to see what kind of service levels could be offered with these 9 sites. And so the blue is good, the green is almost as good, the orange is okay, the yellow is marginal, and the red is forget it. So the interesting part is that when you look at the last line item here, the service level, 641 meg down and 143 meg up, 30% with nine transmitter sites, 30% of your service locations would have access to that level of performance. 47% would have access to 500 meg by 116. So, it's an interesting process, and that it's an interesting prospect. So that wireless design would be about $120 per home passed. Okay. But it's not going to give you the gig service. It's not going to give you the multi-gig capability. It's just like, okay, well, here's the consolation prize possibly. So the summary here is that, and I'm great at stating the obvious, fiber to premise is really expensive. We haven't seen this level of make-ready costs, which I can understand why there's so much make-ready. You're in joint pole here, and it's very rocky. Underground construction costs are very high. But the wireless looks decent, and it's just something that may merit further investigation. So we'll turn it over to Dave.
Okay. So we did look at funding opportunities. And as I mentioned at the outset, there are significant federal grant funding programs out right now. But they tend to target unserved and underserved areas as a qualifying requirement. And the FCC uses what's called its 477 database to identify that. And Neil referenced that in some of the statistics he pulled up. And I think there were only 200 points that were underserved. But this summarizes the different programs. There's ARPA, that's the first one. Then there's BEAD, which is the big one in the industry right now at $42 billion. There's the Reconnect program. And then there's a broadband implementation for California, which is specific to the state, of course. But all of these really require that any infrastructure investment be directed towards under or unserved areas. So unfortunately, that doesn't look like that's going to be a significant opportunity. However, having said that, there are a couple programs that are of interest potentially to you, and they're at the state level. So the first is this one. It's the Local Agency Technical Assistance Grant, or LATA, if you will. And it's providing grants that support planning efforts around broadband infrastructure. And so this is something that it will favor and score higher for projects that are targeting under and unserved areas. but it doesn't totally rule it out. And so we think this is something based on some local feedback that Stephen has been able to obtain and some research that we've done, that this is something that could definitely be an option for supporting future work here. And so basically the idea here is that this helps provide fund for any planning work that a municipality or a district is doing relative to evaluating broadband infrastructure investment. So that's certainly a funding option for further work if you decide to proceed. Then there's the second one is the California Advanced Services Fund. And it can fund both middle mile and last mile projects. Middle mile projects must be open access, and we'll talk about that in business models. And there's some other requirements as well. Eligible entities do include public utility districts, and they are doling out the money. So a total of $348 million spent so far, and this could be an option as well. And again, I think further involvement and interaction with the CPUC on this program would be warranted. Then there are the non-grant funding sources, and the two that we've seen primarily would be 1 and 2, which would tend to be a long-term revenue or a general obligation bond, along with a working capital loan to supplement in the early years when you have working capital needs, because you're not cash flow positive yet. But other things that we've seen, if you talk about a partnership model where you're wholesaling service and you're not the service provider, you would get wholesale fees from the service provider that you would collect, and those can offset any infrastructure investment you make. There's equity. One of our clients is Beverly Hills. They've used equity to fund their fiber project. Local Improvement District, I'll give you an example in Amman, Idaho, that is using LID financing in an interesting way, and that's certainly an option. Private philanthropy. And then what can be, and again, tying back to Amman, is a customer-funded installation as well, and that's been used before. Okay. So that's just a very quick summary on funding. That would become more important if you proceed and move into a full pro forma financial analysis. Business structures. So business structures and business model options really involve how involved you would get as a district in providing the service itself. You can either be fully involved. Some of our clients do everything. They fully fund, they fully build, they fully operate, they own everything. They use some outsourcing, for example, for construction, install crews, so they supplement with some outsourcing, but it's their entity entirely. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is, minimal involvement, maybe some investment, but no operational role whatsoever. And you've got models all in between. I think the thing that's important to think about with looking at models, is just there's the degree of involvement, but there's also then what value comes to the community. So, and there's a little bit of a trade-off potentially here that you need to keep in mind. So wholesale models where you bring in a partner that runs a system can help you minimize your risk. They can help you lower your infrastructure investment. You don't need to staff up, et cetera. So there can be some attractive dimensions to those kind of models. But you also need to make sure that the value to the community is still being delivered. So what you don't want to do is create another private partner that's really just kind of mimicking what's already in place. And that would deal with the price points. Is someone to come in and do a $70 gig service, or is it going to be 90 or 100, right? Are they going to have data caps? So these are things where there's no right answer, and every model tends to nowadays, as we see it, be fully customized. But it's things to think about as you negotiate and evaluate partner options and who's available and what the terms would be. So it's just an important trade-off to be aware of whenever you're talking about your business model options. So in your RFP that we responded to, you identified these 4 business model options, which make sense to us. And they range from an open access partnership, where the district would own but not operate, and there'd be open access simply means there's multiple internet service providers operating on the infrastructure. And then there could be a public-private partnership with private operator ownership and operated. Third, co-op ISP, member ownership and private partner operated. And I would combine both 2 and 3. I think they just have different funding mechanisms, but to me, they're kind of the same model. And then the fourth one would be a full ownership model with kind of two variations, where you do everything, and another variation of that where you own and operate, but you bring on an operating partner, at least for a initial period of time. And the idea here would be that you could offload to someone else some of the initial staffing costs and expertise to kind of help get things going and, minimize your operating expenses during the formative years when you're still building revenue. So if we summarize them, I won't go into all this detail, and hopefully that's readable. But this just kind of places them in terms of who's doing what, who owns what. And again, this is overgeneralizing. These things get so customized. But under the wholesale models, you've got open access and then public-private partnerships. I'd combine your 2 and 3 into that bucket. And then your model number 4, I'd put into the 2 variations under retail. And you can see the differences in how these work out. So as an example, that public-private partnership, 2 and 3, pretty common there is, you would probably do most of the investment, but again, that can be negotiated. There are partners that bring substantial financial contribution to the table. It just depends. And you would build out essentially a fiber to the curb system. And it would be ready to go so that if a customer, residents or businesses want to connect, they would then work with that retail provider, and that retail provider could determine what the charge is to connect, to install that fiber drop, what the charge for the services on a monthly recurring basis, what the service offering is, all of that. So it's kind of like you do the backbone and you build out further to pass all the premises, and then they kind of take it from there. That's oversimplification, but it's more or less that. And then on the retail side, I think the key thing to point out here is the operating role of the district. So that's the second row from the bottom. You see there, you're the service provider still, but you essentially, for the first 5, 7, 10 years, outsource to an approximate partner the functions involving customer care, help desk support, network administration, some of the things where it requires expertise, they have it, and it's kind of like the sleeves out of their vest. They can help you with that. And these situations are very, very popular, mostly with municipals that are proximate to another municipal who's already offering fiber to the premise. And we've been involved in a number of those negotiations. And then there's trade-offs between the two. And again, this is overgeneralizing and simplifying, but there are advantages to the wholesale model, typical advantages, and then typical retail model advantages. And primarily, the advantages to wholesale involve investment and cost. So you can see the total CapEx requirement, it's typically no greater than 80% of the retail model. It doesn't go to zero usually. That's very rare. It's happened, but it's very rare. So you do get a reduction in that total capital expenditure required. And then operating expense is typically no greater than 10 to 20%, of the retail model. So it's pretty drastic reduction. And that's due to the staffing drop that you can see. In terms of retail model advantages, revenue is stronger. You're not just getting that wholesale fee per month that tends to be $6, $17, whatever. So revenue drops typically to 25 to 35% under the retail model for wholesale. So it's a pretty substantial drop when you talk about wholesale revenue. And then there can be differences in the penetration rate, the end user value. So all of those factors really depend on what your service provider partner or partners is bringing to the community and what they're willing to do financially in terms of pricing, caps, policies around data caps, et cetera. And then, of course, you also have the risk of that retail provider not completing a build, going out of business, what have you. I want to mention just a couple examples. Yes.
Do you mind if we just take a few-minute break?
Sure.
I just kind of need to. I need to use the restroom. so I'm like, I'm not able to really process this all right now, and it's a lot of information.
Okay,
so.
yeah, of course.
that would be great. So if we could just take 5, before we dive into this next one.
Okay.
I want to be able to pay attention.
Yeah, perfect.
All right, thank you. Right, right. You'll raise your hand. Yeah. Got it. Good to see you, Jeff. What's that? Oh, right. Where is he again? He is, yeah, above Alder Creek, up in there. Yeah, if you go that behind Alder Creek Middle School, he's up in there. Yeah, below the beacon. Yeah. Tony's still back there. Popcorn. All right. Yeah, see, we need some popcorn. All right. Okay. All right. Dave, thank you very much for that much-needed break. So please, carry on.
Yep. Okay. All right. So I think we've got about 10 minutes left, so we'll cruise to the finish here pretty quickly. Next up is just some examples of, so I mentioned kind of the business structure models and what's typical. I just want to briefly describe a couple examples, and certainly not a recommendation. I just think it can be interesting and be perhaps more insightful to just see some real-world examples of how this can work. But again, not a recommendation. I think to recommend a business model, that takes a lot of detailed financial analysis. That's what we like to do, and model what different terms look like. And certainly that needs to feed into any decision on a business model. And the other factor is just negotiation, just given the nature of a partnership. And it depends on what you can negotiate on, whether a particular model might be attractive to you or not. But first up is Ammon, Idaho. And this is a smaller community, 5,500 households, not a public electric provider. They started their fiber infrastructure investment back in 2011, so it's been quite a while ago. They were preparing to submit, and they did submit an ARRA grant application, but it did not get approved. And they had set aside $1 million as matching funds for that. And they decided, even though they didn't get the grant, to still proceed and build out some middle mile infrastructure, starting with connecting some of their city facilities. And they were able to save money on lease fees, et cetera, by doing that. Then in 2017, they decided to proceed with what's more called a last mile build out. So really taking fiber deeper into the community to pass homes and businesses. And they've used an open access model. So there's really 3 players involved here in their particular model. And again, open access just means that they have multiple service providers that the resident can pick which one they want to use for their home. The city's role has been to fund and construct fiber to the curb. So they got out there and they've done this slowly over time, and I'll describe how they do that. But they're building fiber to the curb. That's on the city. The internet service provider, of course, they make the connection and then provide the internet service to the customer, all the customer support, billing, everything you do as a retailer. And the customer has a role too. In their case, the customer has to fund the installation. And so they've got to pay for the connection. And I'll talk a little bit about how they're doing that with a lid and outside of a lid as well. But the customer, one way or the other, is paying for the connection. And it's a significant amount of money. Right now they have 5 retail service providers offering 1 gig price levels that range from $10 to $110. And there are other fees that add on to that. So I'll give you an example to understand what the end user pays in total. But I looked at the details of the RSPs they're using. No data caps, no contracts, no short-term promotional pricing. They're keeping each other honest. And so from a policy standpoint and value standpoint to the community, looks very positive. Now, the way that they handle this in terms of building out and the investment required and financing is they first start with allowing residents to register and basically raise their hand and say, I want this. And they just use it on their website. And so, this is what they end up with. They end up with these data points of households by a neighborhood saying, I'm registering and I'm going to want the service. When that demand in a particular neighborhood hits a certain level, the town or the city will then create a local improvement district for that neighborhood, and then they'll open it up. And that stays open for a while, and the households can opt into the lid up to 30 days after construction completes. So there's a lengthy period of time where the households can then formally certify and by going into the lid, and I'll jump ahead and show you that form. Simply one-page opt-in certificate, very simple, and that household now is then fully registered to participate in the lid. And then what that does is it allows that household to amortize the construction costs, because construction costs are about $3,200 to $3,600 on typical for a fiber drop. So it's not cheap, but they can then amortize that money over a 20-year period of time if they participate in the lid. If the household misses the lid, they can still get on the network, but they have to pay that full $3,500 or whatever the exact amount is for that home. They have to pay it all up front. It's an inherently slow process because what they're doing is they're not using any other funding or debt instrument or anything of that nature. They're allowing the proceeds of the earlier connections to pay for any future construction. So it moves very slowly. So as I said, this started in 2017. We're in 2013. Right now, they have lids number 5 and 6 open on their website. So that's probably the one disadvantage here is this is a very, very phased approach. So in terms of what the customer gets, so they pay that installation fee. What the city says is with the lid, that averages out to about $23 a month. Then the city additionally charges an operations and maintenance fee. So this is their revenue stream, if you will, for recouping their investment, and that's $16.50 per month for any household or business that is on their network. And then, of course, the internet service provider sets their own fee for the internet service itself, and I mentioned those fees, and they range from $10 to over $100. So the typical range that I saw for 1 gig was $50 to $65 in their case. So really strong value proposition to the community and an interesting way of doing it. And they're getting to that level of value by avoiding what Neil and I see all the time, which is, a heavy burden of debt service costs that get loaded into a pro forma when you're using long-term debt financing. And so it's just a very interesting idea and something to keep in the back of your mind. And then there's Ting. Ting is private sector. They are working with, I think, 9 municipals. I think they have more now. And they charge $90 for gig service. And you can see their fee structure there. But they've been out there for a while now, and they're in a number of communities actively seeking partnerships. And then I won't go through all the typical terms here, but as an example for their financial terms to what would be you, if you were the wholesaler and they're the retail partner of yours, they've been paying $6 a month, and this will vary by contract too, for each premise that you pass with your infrastructure, and then for every premise that's also connected, an additional $17 a month. But as you can see, those wholesale numbers are lower. And then there's more terms that I won't get into here in terms of how they do it. And then another example of conduit is Huntsville, Alabama, that work with Google Fiber. So, but there are many, many examples out there, and as I said, they're all somewhat unique. Now, the thing with that some clients talk to us about business models, and they, sometimes the first thing we hear is we don't want to do all that. We don't want to get involved. We want someone else to do it. We want this in our community. We want the infrastructure, but we don't want to do it. So you have these models that can accommodate that. And this will just give you a feel for what those models translate to in terms of staffing, which I think is what people are usually talking about when they say they don't want to do it. I think it's about staffing. So this is the full retail model. So it's model number 4, as you can see on the upper right. And this is what a typical, organizational chart would look like for a broadband operation where you own and operate as a retailer. Now, there is some outsourcing here, and that's in the orange. And most typically, that can be some customer installs, professional services. But in general, you're doing a lot of it on your own through hired staff. And those would be the green boxes that you see there. Now, if you look at what changes in going to wholesale, you have a person or two, 1 or 2 headcount typically, but all of those positions go over to that service provider. And so that's something why, as I mentioned, that OpEx going down to 10 to 15% of what it is with retail, why it's such a dramatic difference. And then there's this other version of retail with the operating partner. And there, as I mentioned, the purple roles that you see here of network administration, TSR stands for technical service reps, or help desk is the simple term for it, customer service reps handling billing and other issues. All of that can be handed off temporarily to that operating partner and then brought back in at such point in time where it makes sense. So this can be a very efficient model as well within the retail realm. Okay. So wrapping up, the last task 6 was an RFI. So one of the things that as we responded to the RFP, originally we mentioned an RFI. We were thinking about understanding what potential partners could be out there, and we wanted to kind of pull that forward. I think this is a little bit early in its initial and it's preliminary, but we wanted to do that given the potential for federal funding. And we know now that really, other than the 2 programs we talked about, that isn't there right now. But we still went ahead and proceeded with an RFI just to get initial feedback and start testing the waters with this idea. So it was issued to 20 ISPs. The services that we sought were internet service of at least 1 gig, symmetrical, complete community build out. You can't selectively build out. Affordable value-oriented pricing, participation in the ACP program, of course, favorable end-user terms and policies, and the local operations center presence within or proximate to the community, just from a customer service standpoint, that can be very important. But we kept this very high level and vague. We did not provide specific detail about the business model or the funding, or, it was left very open to the responder of the RFI to basically just tell about their organization, and where they wanted to, they could propose some ideas, essentially. So we heard from 4 internet service providers, 2 of them alternative, that would be Oasis and Omsoft, and then 2 legacy that I'll show in a minute. So Oasis came back. You can see they have fiber experience. Of course, you're familiar with them here, but they are involved with fiber as well. It's not just fixed wireless. And you can see the management team and structure there. Again, this is just initial. They brought out some end-user pricing ideas of $40 a month for 200 meg, going up to $90 a month for 1 gig. And then, some of the technology that they propose, and mentioning they're looking to upgrade their wireless technology, et cetera. But they're certainly open to fiber technology as well. We're seeing a different number on the build-out estimate, so we can talk to them about that. Omsoft, unfortunately, had an error in submitting their proposal, and it got cut off at page 2. So we can't give you much more detail about Omsoft at this time. And then in terms of the 2 incumbent providers, there really wasn't a specific proposal. I think both Optimum and AT&T, want to keep a discussion going here. I think Optimum was a little more assertive in, telling us what we shouldn't be doing in terms of this project. So be that as it may. So wrapping it up, I think we're almost on time. In terms of recommendations and next steps and our findings, I think the way that we would summarize it would be to say that there's strong demand for improved broadband, as tested and as you saw in the purchase intent in the survey and how that compared to other surveys. The $70 price point at this point in time would seem to be our recommendation. Construction's going to be costly, whatever the final number is. I think in your case there would need to be some more field design work, et cetera, but it's going to be a big number. Both fiber and wireless technology should remain under consideration, in our opinion. We don't see the participation and eligibility in the huge grant programs, but we do in the 2 California state programs that we identified, and that we would recommend that be further explored, particularly with the California PUD. And then given the cost to build, and this is partly why I'd wanted to show Ammon, is that alternative funding sources should be considered, and keep those in mind. Don't just think bond. Think about potentially using a lid here, possibly some philanthropy, what have you, and then, of course, looking at those grant funds. So next steps, as we see it, the list here that could be, depending on your interest level, of course, it's up to you, but you could look at middle last mile system design, including some real detail on the make-ready analysis, but a full design, and hopefully that could be supported by a ladder grant. Financial analysis will be really important for anything you do in proceeding. That will be required for any, state-level grant submittal, aside from the planning one. But that infrastructure fund, it would. And then also for you to be able to be in a position to really understand your business models and how they differ from a financial outcome perspective. The grant eligibility, as I just mentioned, discussions there. And then ISP engagement as a follow-up to the RFI. But I think the key with that one is if you, down the road, if you've done more homework, you've got more data, if you've scoped out what you're really looking for a little bit more, I think feeding that into an RFP where you're really asking for or directing a specific idea on what you want, that's going to help with the response to that RFP from the internet service provider community, especially if you can identify funding and they can better know what they're getting into. So that's what we had. I think we can entertain questions.
So I'm going to go ahead and
Yeah.
do our routine final slides.
Gotcha.
We'll invite Dave and Neil to go up to the podium if there are questions. And so give me a second here, please. So, the cost for the TDPUD community-wide broadband initial scoping study is $79,000. The board authorized a 10% change order authorization, which does remain. The current report was done on scope on budget. There is no direct fiscal impact associated with this informational workshop item. And the recommendation is to receive this workshop presentation and provide input and direction to staff. And staff and Uptown would be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Neil and Dave. A lot of info, as you said. So now we know what's been happening. So I'd like to open it up for public comment right now. There are a few people, so that we might have a lot of comments, so we'll limit it to 3 minutes apiece. And the podium is open. Is there anyone wanting to make a public comment?
There you go. Good evening, and thank you for entertaining the workshop tonight on broadband and making it one of your initiatives for the PUD to look into. That's really what started this conversation, is public interest, right? You polled your constituent base and they said, yeah, we're interested in hearing about broadband services and how you might be able to help the community. I think for me, it's a little analogous to the PUD stepping in to help things like Glenshire Water and Donner Lake Water. It's not that it didn't cost the PUD to do those things, but the community needed those things, and there was nobody better situated to help the community than the PUD. And I think the situation is very similar to that. There is no one in the community better equipped or capable of helping the community with broadband services. So I really do appreciate the fact that you're looking into the feasibility of it. I urge you to consider that it is ultimately feasibility and financial, but where there's a will, there's a way, right? It's how you apply the funds you have to resolve the issues that are available or that are presented to you. So again, I appreciate you guys considering it. I really, I urge you to consider continuing down the path of examining further the financial feasibility and going into more detail about how to make it happen for the community, and the opportunities that it doesn't have to be one size fits all. It can definitely be, there can be interim measures that help folks that are technically not underserved or unserved, right? But what was, I think the term he used, reality aside, right? They're not technically underserved, but we know they are, right? It was evident from the study, and it's evident from the community feedback that you guys receive, or that I receive. So thank you for entertaining that.
Thank you.
Members of the board. This survey quantifies some of the shortcomings many customers have experienced with internet here in Truckee: speed, responsiveness, reliability, price, customer service. I would also like to highlight a few points from that presentation. Nearly half TDPUD households not getting the speeds they want today. 1 in 2 households perceive upload speed as very important. 10 gig and multi-10 gig capability will be required within 10 years. A 100% fiber network offers the only pathway to multi-10 gig capability. And how are we planning for the future? Over the past 20 years, we've been talking about this. In 2006, the board voted to continue to pursue fiber to the home, which, as you know, didn't go as planned. In 2005, YouTube was registered, bought by Google in 2006. 2007, Netflix began its transition from a DVD by mail to streaming service. 2007, iPhone was introduced with third-party apps a year later. 2011, Zoom teleconferencing software was first released. And in 2010 to 2020, in the last decade, we saw the emerging dominance of cloud computing architectures, software as service, and other virtualization architectures. Much of what many of us use every day now is dependent on access to services like Google Cloud, iCloud, AWS, Cloudflare, Akamai, and others, though most people aren't aware of it. And how are we accessing those services now? For many, the only viable option is the digital coax network, which Seabridge, Suddenlink, Altus, Optimum, whatever, claims to provide nearly 1 gigabit downstream. But we've already shown here, measures far less. It's choked for upstream capacity. They're known for being deceptive about pricing, unreliable and unresponsive, and with their monopoly, they have no incentive to improve. Other providers are able to find niche here and there, but have an uphill battle, fronting enormous expenses of creating a competitive network. These current broadband technologies are already operating at capacity. What happens when we need to upload that terabyte back up to cloud? Turn in our full resolution movie edit project to the studio? What other use cases are we going to have in our future? Had we deployed single mode fiber 20 years ago, we'd be in a much better place for what the next 20 years will hold. So we know already that a completely fiber network is our district's best path forward to service our community, but it is a significant cost, and that cost is also why no for-profit company would invest in build-out to provide better service for only a subset of customers. But if this is what our community needs to move forward, consider the alternative cost of not having this implemented. The debate has gone on for 100 years over telecom, dating back to before telecom, before it was telegraph. Historically, communities have often tried to improve services either by providing a public-owned option to augment or compete with existing for-profit companies, or by subsidizing a for-profit company to do a build-out, handing them a monopoly. But other models are common. Town builds roads and everybody chooses their own car. It's a common infrastructure. Just one more. This is also the advantages of designing an open access model for broadband infrastructure discussed, effectively creating the wholesale road system to reach everyone, creating paths for all businesses and customers to share. This is using public money to provide infrastructure which benefits everyone. PUD would bring fiber to homes and businesses, but also lease connectivity to providers to improve existing technologies like point-to-multipoint wireless, digital cable, cellular networks, and other services. By working from the backbone connectivity outward, improving existing services, and creating new opportunities along the way, the PUD would leverage economies of scale to reach everyone with equitable, fast, and scalable services. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Barney Dewey, and I've been involved in electronic communications forever. I should say before the internet even existed. So, anyway, a couple of things. First, it is so great to have a local public utility like this. This really is a big issue for Truckee. It makes Truckee special. There's lots of things that make Truckee special, but this utility is definitely one of them. I think that report was fantastic, very comprehensive. I think it fits with a lot of my observations. But I do have a few observations, and please don't take this critically. It's just from my experience and what I've seen. And I'm just going to talk about how speed is such a problematic discussion. First of all, anybody doing a speed measurement really has to do it at the modem that's provided by the service provider with a wired connection. Otherwise, you're talking about the issues of how Wi-Fi doesn't work very well for most people, and they have old Wi-Fi capabilities. I have some of the most recent mesh Wi-Fi, and you have to know the second you go on the Wi-Fi, the speed drops dramatically, depending upon where you are, according to an access point. So first of all, and this leads to my second point, is internet speed perceptions. People perceive that they don't have the speed that they want or need, but usually it's because they have these older or less expensive Wi-Fi access points. People aren't plugging into the wall, you know, and what they might have plugged into the wall might be the TV or something, but they don't usually measure the internet speed over your TV. So just a couple of issues here about speed and how much do we need. 4K TV streams at 25 megabits. You have 3 TVs simultaneously in your house going with 4K, and you're using 75 megabits. Okay, the future is 8K. Well, that jumps to 48 per TV. How many people are going to be running 3 8K TVs in their house? So one of the big things comes down to really what is the future going to be. No one's talking about 3D TV. Nobody is really talking about what the metaverse is going to need beyond what we already have. It's a discussion, so can I go a little bit longer?
Maybe summarize a little
Okay.
speedier.
Okay.
Would be nice.
Basically, today and for the foreseeable future, speeds over 200 or even 400 megabits really aren't required. What's required is for people to put better infrastructure in their home on the other side of the ISP. I do have other comments about connecting to homes when most homes are wired for cable and not for Cat5 interconnections. So there's a bunch of issues there. But in summary, I think the speed thing can be a real red herring, and it really needs to be thought out on what people really need and how they connect their devices to the internet. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have time in this whole process, so please feel free to submit your comments in writing, because we definitely have the time to read those and incorporate your comments if you do write them and send them in. So thank you. All right, any comments on the web?
Mr. President, we had one submitted on Friday last week that I forwarded on to the board, and I can read that if you would like.
It was pretty simple.
Oh, okay. All right.
It was short.
All right, real short, so, all right, go ahead.
Very short.
Thank you.
Thank you for having this meeting about townwide broadband. If the town considers adopting this plan and becoming its own ISP, how confident are you that we can enable downloads and upload speeds? Is the plan to provide fiber access, or would the town use existing infrastructure from current ISPs at the service area? And that was submitted by Cody Salinas.
Great. Okay, thank you.
No further public comment.
Is there any other in-person public comment? All right. Close public comment and go into the board discussion on broadband. So really appreciative of all the information. Krista, do you have any questions, comments?
Sure, I will get the ball rolling. I'll get the ball rolling with my microphone on. That was a lot of information. Thank you very much for presenting that to us and giving it to us in our, so we can leisurely absorb things. It seems to me, I appreciate Mr. Dickerman, Judy Price. I am of the same mind. I feel like what the PU does is provide infrastructure. That's what we do. We are what allows this community to be a modern community. We supply drinking water, we supply electricity. This seems to me like a natural need. It's a need. It is a utility service at this point in time. You know, we have, thinking back to 15 years ago when there wasn't an iPhone is just weird. It's really weird. Things have changed so much, so fast, and we know the next 10 years, the pace of change is also accelerating, right? We don't know what we don't know. We don't know what we're going to need, but we know those need. We know they're going to be there, right? I was extremely intrigued by the town of Amon, Idaho, how they tackled this. I do feel it is appropriate. I feel it's appropriate for the PUD to continue to provide reliable, necessary infrastructure for this town. How we do it, that's what this presentation, there's clearly a need. That was the best part of the presentation, that this community is very clear that they support this. So how can we best do it? I also feel like we're a community-owned, we're a PUD, we're a public utility district. We don't need to make a profit. That is not our mission. So you take out all that money, we don't take out all that money, but we have the best chance to help this community achieve full fiber, what do you call it? Deployment. There we go. There's a word. That'll work. Without adding more layers of cost. So if we can help provide the infrastructure and other, open access model, we've got people who know how to do that. We have local ISP providers. We can let them duke it out. But that's where I'm sitting right now. I feel, next steps would be to supply funding for the next feasibility study, which we can, and they, listed the sources where that might come from, so we can explore how to do it with, a grant. That's the end for me.
Nice. Feel free to interject as we move on. Yeah, it's a discussion. Okay. Tony.
Yeah, I know, what a lot of information. Sorry about that. What a lot of information you guys provided and really pointed, well said, laid out and very efficient, so thank you. Makes our jobs a little bit easier. A few questions, I guess, and this is really kind of broad brush, but we're talking about, and I appreciate your comments, Mr. Dewey, but we're also talking about not only what we need today, but what we need in 10, 15, 20 years. And I do believe the trend line will continue to go up in what we need as far as speeds. So we definitely want to look at what we can do to get to some of these targets, and 1 gig and more. And I think it's pretty obvious that fiber is the way to get there. A couple questions I have, and maybe this is technical for Neil, but can a coax network similar to what Optimum has deployed and to DOCSIS 3.1, are there limits to what they can provide as far as speed?
I mean, conceptually, they can go a gig or more, but it's just not possible for them to do what you can do on a fiber strand. I mean, it is a technological marvel what they're getting out of coax cable.
Right.
But that's what it is. It's a marvel, and it's something that takes a Herculean effort to develop that technology and try and keep pace with fiber.
Right.
And that capability.
I'm kind of intrigued by the hybrid system that you presented. I think it offers some pretty unique advantages. Do you see that hybrid system ever approaching 10 gigabytes in the future?
Possibly on an engineered point-to-point line, but not as a mass market service.
Remind me, what was the hybrid again?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It was they had the 9 nodes sort of deployed around the.
Oh, okay.
And I'm assuming those nodes broadcast, and then the customer has a receiver on their end, or a two-way. And so there's no fiber necessarily from the node to the home. That's all done wirelessly.
Correct.
So, but the backbone to the node is fiber.
Yeah, and those sites would be co-located with strategic fiber-connected PUD resources.
Right. And can those, you guys had sort of modeled 9 nodes. What happens if you doubled or tripled those nodes? Is there kind of a point of no return on the cost versus what the performance improvements are? Or?
Well, you'd have more blue dots.
Yeah, so I wrote, how do you get more blue?
You look at where the green, yellow, orange, red, you look at where those are, they're probably in, valleys, or they're behind some hill. And then you start to engineer those, you start to fill in the blanks, or, fill in those spots that are harder to reach from this hilltop over here. You come up here, you got a shadow cast, then you put one up here, and then it paints that area down there. The radios in that system are 800 megabit radios. So conceivably, it would top out at 800 megabits per second based on this generation, G1.
Right.
But the issue with wireless is that we're in this room, and all the wireless spectrum that's available is around us. But on a fiber strand, you can take one wavelength and put everything that you can have in this wireless spectrum. You can have 10, 20, 100 wavelengths all doing that amount of capacity on one fiber strand. So it's just, the physics of it are tough to duplicate in a wireless world, especially with spectrum and how it's licensed.
Okay. This might be a question for our staff, but, we have joint pole agreements with Sudden Link and AT&T. Are those joint pole agreements, do they dictate what infrastructure those companies can put on the poles? I mean, for instance, if we went, could Suddenlink come in and say or Optimum come in and say we want to put fiber on our poles, on your poles or our poles?
Joe, do you want to provide a little bit of kind of an overview, a summary overview of how the joint pole agreement works and what can be on there?
Yes, so the joint pole agreement allows, we're part of the JPA, the Joint Pole Association. What that means is that when we go to change a pole, put on larger conductors is a typical example of when we do this kind of when we go through the JPA process. We run it through an engineering analysis to see what size pole is needed to support our new wires, and we also do an engineering analysis on the wires that AT&T has. So typically, anytime we touch a pole to put on larger conductors, in a typical example that we've done, it requires a pole change out. A new pole, typically larger, and then the JPA process, the AT&T owns the communication space, so that's an area from, off the top of my head, it's about an area from 16 feet up to 20 feet, in that range. I may be off by a foot or two. They own that portion, and then they control the communication space for other providers. So the Suddenlinks of the world, or Optimum now. And then we would control the space above 20 feet all the way to the top of the pole. And then a common area would be the area from the ground level up to about 16 feet, because it's common in the sense we both need it to support our facilities at a certain height. And so if we go in to put in a new pole, the communication, AT&T would pay for their portion of a new pole, and we would pay, it's split up. JPA has all the different charges dialed in for who pays for what in terms of the pole portion and then the common portion. So it depends on who starts the process. So like if we do the process, which is we're going through and we're putting in new poles. Obviously, there's poles that need changing because they don't pass, they're old enough, or for other reasons where we need to replace them, or we're doing reconductoring. So if we start and initiate the process, we're paying for our portion, and then they pay. If we have to rebuild a pole, then the AT&T would pay for their portion. But at that time, they specify what their needs are. So if for their plant, for their conductors, and then, but Suddenlink or Optimum is not actually part of the JPA process. They're subleasing with AT&T. So AT&T takes care of the communication space.
So, in essence, AT&T could, if they wanted to deploy a fiber network, an aerial fiber network, that space that they have access to through the JPA could be a viable solution for them to put in fiber?
Well, they could, yes. So each party in the JPA has the ability to say, I need to change my plant or put in something bigger. But there's a set process for that. They have to go through an engineering analysis to see if the existing pole can handle the load.
Right.
And if they're the straw that breaks the camel's back, so to speak, if their plant requires a change in pole, then there's costs associated with it that get divided out with the JPA process.
Okay. And if we were to deploy an aerial fiber network, where would we end up on our own poles?
Right.
Well, there's options. One of the options we can do is to reserve a space right above AT&T space to be able to put in our own fiber cable. This is what we've done as part of our SCADA reliability improvement project build-out in the Tahoe-Donner area. When we had to attach, we knew we were going to attach to poles. So when we went through the analysis, what it means, though, is you have to have essentially a taller pole. Poles don't come in an infinite varieties of length. They're typically in the utility industry. They're 5-foot increments in pole height. So typically, for us to preserve an extra bit of space on the pole meant we had to go. Our typical pole is a 40-foot pole or a 45-foot pole. So when we had to reserve our space for our own fiber, we had to go to the next size up. So like a 40, if it was a 40-foot pole area, a 45-foot pole, or if it was already a 45-foot pole and we needed extra space, we had to go to a 50-foot pole to reserve that space.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Kim?
Thank you very much for the presentation. It definitely filled in a lot of gaps and always creates a little extra question here and there. But it's also exciting. It's an exciting time to hear the support from the community on this. The questions I have, and maybe they were already answered somehow, but would this service only go to our electric customers? Or would it also extend out to the people who are also our water customers? Because I know some of our water customers are on Liberty Energy.
Yeah, our analysis looked at our whole service territory, and they evaluated both our electric and our water service territory. There was a regulatory process, should we enter this business through LAFCO, where that would have to be clearly defined, but we assumed both at this point.
Gotcha. And then the other just observation is that we are very second homeowner kind of heavy, although I believe that the second homeowners would be super excited to be able to come up and watch their movies, and put the kids in one room and have, mom and dad each having their own room and available for broadband.
Or 8K TVs.
Exactly. But I always, I know that obviously I see locals in here and it's always, good to have the support, but it's also important to take our second homeowners in consideration with this. But that's pretty much all I had, so thanks.
Great. A lot of info. Next steps. Krista, you're pretty clear in your next step.
It seemed logical to me if we can secure funding for a more specific business model feasibility study, that seems like a logical next step to me.
With the highest interest of yours with the fiber.
Yes.
The hard fiber to all the blue dots.
I think that would be my goal, right? Like my ultimate, that would be the best, right?
And then Tony, you asked about the hybrid, adding more. I don't know what color the nodes were.
More blue.
To allow for blue, but that didn't really excite me much, because, and say with the other wireless stuff, it's just like, okay, more of the same of what we already have. And the community is really pushing for the next step, the future, the 10 gig and beyond. So, and then Kim, are you thumbs up for continuing on next steps?
Definitely.
Yeah. Look at that.
I think the improvement district, we all have to recognize that it's not our money, it's our community's money, and it's our ratepayers' money. They're the ones paying for this. There's no magic.
Yeah,
There's no money tree out there.
Well, when it snows, that's liquid frozen gold.
Ultimately, the community is paying for it in the end. And minus whatever we can find in grant funding, obviously. As far as I'm concerned, yes, I'm super curious to investigate where we would land with a improvement district approach to this process. I think, the description of the town in Idaho doing that, while I think there's probably ways to go about it a little more expeditiously than perhaps they are, but, because I think there's a lot of motivation in this community. I think it's worthy of focusing a little bit of effort on that approach, because those costs can be amortized over time for the customers. It just makes more sense in the long run. But yeah, no, I'm definitely interested in moving forward and looking at and trying to sort of refine some more business models, understanding that. And then, at some point, we have to also broach the subject of the regulatory approach, and what it would, what our steps would be, not only from a business, once we kind of look at what the business aspect of this is and some of those structures, but, how do we get through the regulatory process? Because we will have to go through LAFCO. And
Five-letter word.
Yes. Just another hurdle for us to get there. I think that's what the community wants, but we have to recognize that there are other variables that are out there that we have to consider.
So just, I guess what I'm hearing is adding the regulatory thing to the next steps as part of that. And then is there, like, the ISP engagement as follow-up to RFI responders? Is that something that we definitely need to include in this next step, or I'm not against it or for it, but, if we were to only have 4, I'd probably want to swap it out for regulatory stuff, but.
Yeah, I think that part is optional. So I think, the point I was trying to make earlier, we obviously did a very high-level exploratory RFI. I think it is pretty important and ideal if you then rerun that process down the road when we've really got more definition around how this project would be structured, the business model, et cetera. So I think it's fine to delay that.
It'd be that final next step, doing the other financial analysis, middle, last mile, system design, et cetera.
Yep, yeah, so I think swapping that out for regulatory evaluation would be a great approach.
If we only needed to do 4.
Yeah, it's capped at 4.
Yeah, it's capped at 4, we can't, that's.
Yeah, I think that'd be fine.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Any other further thoughts?
Not that need to be
Addressed?
not here right now.
Yeah, okay.
So President Bender, if I just want to kind of summarize, board's direction to staff or guidance is to continue the process of assessing and pursuing what the options are for community-wide broadband and the district's role. Is there a specific model that the board would like us to further examine, the open access, the wholesale or retail? We can conduct feasibility studies on all of those, or we can narrow those down to specific interest. We do have some budgetary cap space left in our authorization from the board to further engage with Uptown and some additional consultation and kind of help us on the next steps in terms of additional assessments, but really wanted to have an opportunity for the board to give at least some guiding parameters there. Is it kind of all of the above, or is there a specific model that you're interested in?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I was hearing the hardwired fiber with the improvement district,
Okay.
open access.
Thank you for the
kind of
clarification.
Yeah,
The peak
that's
of the
how I felt.
pyramid.
It's the peak- Exactly,
Is that considered the wholesale or the retail?
wholesale.
Wholesale.
Like we build out fiber.
Yeah.
Other ISP providers
Okay.
utilize it. We help them.
But it could change.
Right,
Right.
Moving
So-
target.
If it doesn't work, that's
Right,
what the study's
right.
for, right?
Correct.
Okay.
No, my gut says that wholesale.
Wholesale retail partner or.
I like the wholesale. side, where we build the infrastructure and let somebody else come in.
And do things with it.
I appreciated the comments about, that approach. We provide the infrastructure, but we don't provide the customer service, and those are a lot of the concerns. Well, I don't disagree that I think it's a good model, but I think we just, as we approach that subject, it's how do we engage these ISPs to make sure that there's a level of service that they're providing,
Right.
with that we're satisfied with, since they are using our infrastructure.
Right.
So moving forward with an open mind on the wholesale retail part of it, to ensure, we're following the mission statement. Customer
Absolutely.
service is in there.
And then staff will come back at a later date. There's no recommendation for this evening, other than the feedback and guidance. Staff will come back with, after further kind of analysis or assessments on the proper order of legal assessments, further engagement with local ISPs, and make sure that we check all those boxes.
Steve Gross, did you have any thoughts or concerns to chime in?
I was just going to whisper something to Brian.
Oh, now you have the mic.
Now I have a mic.
You have the mic.
I'm on. Thank you. If I recall correctly, there may be some potential grant funding opportunities for planning purposes. Is that something that we should be looking at now? Are we at that planning stage where we should be looking at grants? That's the only other feedback I had at this moment.
Yeah, I think it would be prudent for the district to, as we have done through this entire process, keep LAFCO informed and engaged along the process to make sure that we don't cross those thresholds inappropriately.
Great.
Right, and when I brought up regulatory earlier, I would also defer to Steve to kind of interject that into the process, or recommend where we interject that into the process, moving forward.
So, if I may, staff has been in contact with LAFCO. LAFCO is aware that the district is exploring this idea at the request of the community. I believe that what would be required to pursue authorization from LAFCO or authority to activate the latent power to provide these kinds of communication services would be to have a business plan, an viable economic business plan that LAFCO could evaluate. So that, and we could confirm that with LAFCO staff, but I think that would require advancing this discussion to the point of understanding which type of model we're looking at, what kind of funding might provide us a pathway towards that. But I think we probably have to answer those questions before we go to LAFCO. But I think LAFCO has been very cooperative, interested in what we're doing, and would likely be very helpful in helping us understand where they fit into the process.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, does that make, you got it? So, local agency technical assistance program. So, let's see if we can get some funding to create a plan that we show to LAFCO so we can get regulatory compliance, and then, okay. Got it.
Lots of different colored dots to connect.
Blue, green, yellow.
All right, are we ready? I think that concludes item number 14. So thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. And we'll take, I'd say let's take another break here.
All right.
Just to regroup while the audience departs.
Yeah.
3 now. Okay, so I think we have a consent calendar to approve. We have items 8, 9, 10, and 11. Is there any public comment on the consent calendar?
No, Mr. President.
All right, there is none. Any board comments or requests to pull an item? Is there a motion?
I'll move approval of the consent calendar.
I'll second.
We got a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Thank you, Director Finn.
Yes.
Director Harris.
Yes.
Vice President Waliotis.
Yes.
President Bender.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, our first action item tonight is item number 12, consideration of setting expectations for agenda postings in relation to Assembly Bill 8B 2449, teleconferencing for the Brown Act.
Good evening, board members. Can you hear me okay? I'm going to present from here because I don't have a slide deck presentation. There is a memo in your meeting packet. Brian asked me to submit this memo. Tony may have seen it before. Which focuses on changes to the Brown Act specific to teleconferencing, because the landscape has changed in the last couple of years, and it's continuing to change right now. So the purpose of this workshop is to tell you where the law is and look at some options at how we can conduct our meetings going forward, and hopefully get some direction from the board as how you would like staff to proceed. Teleconferencing in the Brown Act isn't new. There's been teleconferencing provisions for the last 35 years or so. We refer to those as our traditional teleconferencing rules, and I'll describe those in just a moment. When COVID became a thing a couple years ago, we first had an executive order from the governor that loosened some of our teleconferencing rules, and then the legislature passed or moved into law AB 361, which is the very relaxed teleconferencing provisions that we have been operating pursuant to for the last couple years. AB 361 is only in effect one more year, okay, until January of 2024. However, one of the key requirements is that in order to utilize those provisions, there has to be a state of emergency in effect that has been declared by the governor. So in California, state of emergency can be declared by the governor, it can be declared by a county, it can be declared by a city. Can't be declared by a district such as ours. But in order for AB 361 provisions to be utilized, we have to have this gubernatorial declaration of emergency. We've been operating under the governor's declaration of emergency since February 2020, and the governor announced last year that he intends to terminate that declaration of emergency effective at the end of February this year. Okay, so as of March 1, we won't be able to utilize AB 361 procedures unless or until there's another declaration of emergency. Unfortunately, for many of our friends and neighbors in the foothills experiencing flooding, there is a state of emergency that is in effect. And so, under those circumstances, agencies are able to utilize AB 361. In September of last year, AB 2449 was passed, which amends the Brown Act and provides some flexibility going forward for teleconferencing. You're going to see and hear that the provisions of that law are so restrictive that it may not be very useful, but it is an option, because come March 1, the only options we'll have for teleconferencing will be our, quote, traditional teleconferencing rules or the rules under AB 2449, okay? So real quickly, our traditional teleconferencing rules been around for 35 years. We can continue to use them through the pandemic. They're going to continue beyond the pandemic, as far as we know. And what those rules allow, and these rules, I should say, they pertain to members of the legislative body, so the board members. Okay, if you're in an agency where you have a committee that is a Brown Act committee, a standing committee, then these rules would apply to the members of those committees, but they do not apply to staff or consultants, okay? Traditional teleconferencing. Board members can participate remotely via teleconference, provided that we identify each remote location where a board member will participate on the agenda. We've got to post that agenda at that remote location within the time required. So for a regular meeting, that's 72 hours. For a special meeting, it's 24 hours. We have to have a majority of the board members participating in the meeting from within the boundaries of the district. And we have to take all vote by roll call. We have to indicate how each board member voted. So it sounds relatively easy, but it is not always as easy as it sounds. If you're headed to a conference, you know you're going to be there and want to participate, you say, oh, okay, well, I have to post on the agenda that I'm going to attend the meeting from the Hilton. And then you have to communicate with the Hilton to post the agenda, and you have to be in a location in the Hilton that is open and available to the public so that members of the public can fully participate, so that they can hear and provide public comment. Okay, they don't have to be able to see, you don't need a video feed, but they do need to be able to participate. That's easy. Every cell phone has a speaker on it, but posting the agendas, it can be a little bit more challenging. Okay, but we always have those options available. So if you know that you're going to be away, and maybe you're at a location where it is easy to post an agenda in advance, you know, you're going to the in-laws, you're going to the cousins or whatever, you can say, hey, post this at the house, open the doors, the public's going to come rushing in. Nobody ever comes to those meetings, but you have to go through that process. Under AB 361, these are the relaxed rules that we had been operating under for some time. These relaxed rules allowed members of the legislative body, the board members, to participate remotely via telephone without having to post their remote location on the agenda, without having to post that agenda at the location. We did have to provide the opportunity for either an electronic based platform, Zoom, GoToMeeting, or telephonic participation by members of the public. There was so much uncertainty about this law. It wasn't very clear whether or not we could require public participation by submitting written comments, whether or not we had to allow the members of the public to attend virtually. We didn't even have to have a room where the public could attend, right? We could just say, this is a remote meeting. You can access it via Zoom or via this telephone number. And if you want to provide comments, we need to have them submitted in writing in advance by 3 p.m. on Monday so that we can get it all organized and prepared. We didn't have real good guidance, and so lots of organizations had all different kinds of rules, and we struggled a bit as an organization, as did others, in trying to figure out how can we make this work, how can we be transparent, how can we provide access, but do so in a responsible and meaningful way that is fair and that doesn't create a whole nother subset of issues. AB 361 has been, in my view, very useful, very forgiving, and it did have some other limitations. I mean, for example, if during the meeting the electronic or telephone feed became interrupted, you have to stop the meeting. You can't take action going forward. It makes sense, right? If the public can't participate in the open session, then you need to stop the open session. And we also did have to have a majority of the directors participating from within the jurisdictional boundaries of the district. So we have, at the PUD, we've discontinued those meetings. We've been meeting in person. Okay, we also had to make findings every 30 days, if you remember. We had a resolution that made findings that it would, be detrimental to the health and safety of the community and those in attendance, and therefore we had a need to be able to meet remotely. Those resolutions were routinely approved and adopted. But I'll call it the luxury of AB 361 generally comes to an end for us come March 1. Okay, again, we're not meeting that way, so it shouldn't be a big effect. But what happens going forward, March 2nd and forward, if we have a meeting and one of you can't make it in person, but you want to attend? Okay, maybe you're going to a conference. Maybe you get sick. Maybe you get exposed to somebody who's sick. And so at the last minute, and I am following PUD protocols, and I just to let you know. So if something happens and you get sick at the last minute, but you really want to participate because there's a really riveting presentation on the Brown Act, I mean on telecommunications and broadband, that you want to be here for, right? How can we do that? So there are a number of rules under this AB 3441 that is in effect right now, and it will be in effect, I believe, 3 years. Thank you. And I am hoping that there will be further legislation that gives us more flexibility and better options. But under AB 2449, we can use remote teleconferencing if we have at least a quorum of the board present physically in person at a physical location. So we still have to call and notice the meeting at a physical location where the public can participate, and a quorum of you have to be here. Okay? If 3 of you say, oh my gosh, I've got COVID or I was exposed, we couldn't conduct the meeting under these rules, okay? A board member may only participate under these rules if they have just cause in emergency circumstances, and I'll get back to that in a minute, in a few minutes. So you can't just say, oh, my dog ate my homework or whatever, I want to work from home tonight. You have to have just cause, you have to have basis under the law, and having the meeting conducted remotely has to be approved by the board at the meeting, okay? A board member can only utilize these remote teleconferencing provisions a limited number of times. So your maximum of 3 consecutive board meetings, okay, whether they're regular or special meetings, and no more than 20% of the district's meetings in a year's time. Okay, I think we have roughly 15 meetings or so scheduled this year, so maybe 3 meetings max is, what you could utilize this for. And it would require some additional record keeping on the district so we know, who's utilized these provisions and remote participation options, how frequently, when you did it, so that we can play by the rules. In order to use these rules, we have to have both a two-way audio-visual platform or two-way telephone service. So we either have to have telephone or say Zoom or GoToMeeting, and there has to be a live stream broadcast of the meeting, okay? Now, we are fortunate. We are set up with that technology here. Not every agency has that ability. But, for example, this becomes important if, for example, a board member wanted to utilize these remote provisions at the very last minute. They didn't know they were going to be away at a conference, and so we couldn't, make sure that we agendized the meeting to have both the electronic and visual participation ability. So if somebody at the last minute says, geez, I've got COVID, I can't come tonight, and we didn't have on the agenda, the Zoom meeting information and the telephonic meeting information, and we weren't live streaming, then that board member could not participate remotely. Okay, so this will play heavily in the decision that we'll be asking you to make and give guidance. You know, will you, for example, you want the staff to conduct every meeting in a way that has, well, what we've used here is Zoom, so Zoom ability to participate, and/or telephonic access, and the live stream video, okay? So if the direction will be, yeah, we want every meeting to be set up that way, so that at the last minute, a board member can attend remotely, if he or she needs to and desires to, we'd have to have that in place. Whereas if, for example, you know that in May, you're going to be going to a conference, right, for a business work conference, and you want to set up remote participation under these rules, then we have a little bit more time to plan for that particular meeting, okay? If a board member wants to participate remotely under these rules, you have to notify the board, the district, the board at the earliest opportunity, okay, and request that you be allowed to participate remotely. There's no guidance that says how you make that request, how you provide that information. A telephone call, an email, a text would suffice in my view. But you have to have just cause. Okay, so just cause is defined in the law. It's very specific. So if you need to provide care for a child, a parent, a grandparent, a grandchild, a sibling, a spouse, or a domestic partner that requires you to care for them, that would be grounds to participate remotely. If the board member, him or herself, has an illness that is contagious, read COVID, that prevents you from attending in person, that constitutes just cause. A need that's related to a physical or mental disability would be just cause. And if you are traveling on official business of the body or another state or local agency. Now, if your employer happens not to be a local or state agency and you need to travel on behalf of your employer, that doesn't constitute just cause under this statute. Okay? At that meeting, the member who is participating remotely must participate both audibly and visually. So if you are just feeling wrecked and horrible with COVID and you want to participate, you still got to put your smiling face on the screen for all of us to see. Okay, that's just one of the rules. And you also have to disclose to the meeting if there is anyone 18 years or older who is present with you in the room, because they said so. That's why. Those are and there's again the rules if there's an interruption in the audio-visual feed or Zoom, that we would not be able to take further action. Those are most of the rules, okay? There's a couple other minor little rules, but you can see that this law does provide a little bit of flexibility, but it is rigid in many, many ways. That said, you know, the purpose of tonight's discussion is to, one, inform you of these changes to the teleconferencing rules and look for guidance from you as how you would like to conduct these meetings going forward. And Shauna had put together a memo, and there's some options in there. One option is that we simply meet in person like we are doing tonight. We do have our live video feed, but we have not published on our agenda a Zoom or telephone access for the meeting. Okay, and so tonight, if you know at 5 o'clock one of you got sick, wasn't feeling well, tested for COVID, said I can't come in, and you wanted to participate remotely, you could not, because we did not schedule the meeting that way. Okay, so one option, we just have our meetings like we've done for the last almost 100 years, 95, 94 years, 97 years, something like that. Anyway, that we've done, and we continue that way. Another option is to have every meeting agendized with Zoom and/or telephonic information, and then make sure that we live feed the meeting. And then, in that instance, if someone needed to participate and wanted to participate remotely at the last minute, provide notice at the earliest possible opportunity with the request that you be able to participate remotely. The board is able to make a decision and must make a finding that you can participate remotely. And even though that decision is not agendized, the Brown Act was amended to allow that kind of an action, even though it wasn't agendized, okay? So those are really the primary options. I'll stop there, and I'd be happy to entertain questions. I can tell that you are all
Just
riveted, yes. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Steve. Is there any public comment tonight on this item? Any online? We're still accepting those.
No, Mr. President.
All right, board discussion. You going to change the precedent, Kim, from 100 years or not?
That's not what I want to do. But so, I mean, if somebody's watching the meeting on YouTube, because we're on YouTube now, or however they watch it, can they still shoot an email to us and ask us a question in the middle? So that will not change. So they can still submit emails. Okay, that's my one question.
Tony?
Yeah, I'm just curious, though, if we did post Zoom links, et cetera, even though a board member per se didn't need to utilize that, could the public utilize that as means of
Yes.
monitoring the meeting and communicating?
Yes, so if we notice a meeting, say that we will conduct a meeting here at the PUD conference room, as we always do, but the meeting is also accessible via this Zoom link, then members of the public can fully participate via that Zoom link. So in other words, when we call for public comment, they can participate and provide public comment live, real time, where one of the features of AB 2449 is that we cannot require that public comment be provided in advance. We have to allow public comment to be provided real time at the meeting.
And the public doesn't need just cause?
No, sir, they don't.
No, that was a joke. Sorry, public. No, okay, yeah, I mean, I feel like, I appreciate, Kim, you clarifying that, the public still can participate remotely. And, this system's been working for the number of years it's been in place. I feel like we're a pretty strong group and, pretty good at making decisions and working as whatever number of board members we have present. And if you are unable to attend, you are unable to attend. I feel like the nature of our business is there aren't very many meetings where if something important had to be, if there was something important that it couldn't be deferred to another month. And if it was that important, that we'd find a way to schedule a special meeting or do something to make it happen. So I am comfortable with just sticking with what we got.
Nice.
I am also comfortable sticking with what we got. I like in-person meetings. I like the public to come here in person and talk to us. And I also feel like if you have a contagious illness or you have a need related to a mental disability or you're taking care of a ill parent or child, I think they deserve your attention. You deserve to take care of yourself, and I don't want you to have to Zoom into the meeting. And there's a reason there's 5 of us that we can absorb a loss or two on any given meeting. So that's where I fall down. Let's stick with what we got.
All right.
I should have said that the decision we're asking you to make tonight is not an irrevocable, etched in stone decision. You could change this at any time you want. If for some reason you decide we want to change things up, you can later. So I didn't say that, but
We don't necessarily have to take action in anything. If there's a need, staff can just post the appropriate links on the agenda. I'm saying and then following if it was a board member that needed to attend remotely, we're not making the decision to not allow that. We're just saying unless there's a special circumstance, we will interject that into the process if need be, but for now, we will not do that as a regular thing.
I think that's good guidance. Is that?
If I may, and it's good guidance, if just a little bit of clarification, that what staff is seeking from the board is just some guidance on how we want to proceed with subsequent board meetings. As Steve Gross has pointed out, we can change at any time. However, staff would need to agendize the online portal in advance at the time of posting the agenda. And so if the district and the board want to be prepared for unexpected needs to report or participate remotely, we'd have to, every board meeting, make sure that was agendized and that the resource was tested and available. Right. If the board wants that, we can do that. It's a little bit more, staff resources need to be put in place to make sure that is managed. One of the concerns is, we just had a very in-depth presentation on broadband. If you report remotely and the connection's cut, as Mr. Gross pointed out, no further action can take place. And so we just want to make sure that the board's understanding of that. If something happens in advance and you're going to be reporting remotely, staff can absolutely prepare that with the agendized note and resources.
I guess my point is, the board doesn't need to take action to have that happen, if need be, if it comes down the road.
Yes. 3 week or planning now for the next meeting. Yes. If one of us say, no, we really want to do an online thing, we can then properly plan for that at the next meeting.
Absolutely. Staff will, based on the conversation this evening, proceed with the in-person setup, the standard setup. If something comes up, the board can advise staff and we will prepare accordingly.
Default is current,
Default
but we are
is
flexible
current.
and we'll respond.
Yes, perfect. That's how it should always be.
Steve, would you like, do we need a motion since it's an action item? Do we need a motion and a second and a vote?
You don't. You can provide direction to staff, which I think you've done. I don't think a formal motion and action vote is necessary.
Got it.
Thank you. That's
Okay.
appreciate your attention and providing direction.
Thank you. Okay, so that takes us to our second and last action item, consideration of the consulting services contract with Pamela Hurt Associates for leadership development and strategic planning.
Thank you, President Bender. So I wanted to give a little bit of a background first before we get into the kind of the meat and potatoes of the presentation. Back in 2020, the board of directors and staff here at the district began the process of a strategic plan development. If you recall, back in the fall of 2020, we began the process of several workshops and team building exercises as well as strategic planning workshops with both the board, the general manager, and staff, and with a couple of goals in mind, a couple of goals through the process. And that included evaluation of the mission statement. We had a great workshop and really with the board and staff going through the mission statement as it was and doing some refinement so that it really clearly stated the goals and missions of the district for our community and ratepayers. We had an exercise in identifying core values that were important to this organization, both the board and staff. We did a lot of exercises in organizational culture, really defining what those behaviors look like tied to our values. We adopted strategic levers. We defined board of director goals over the next strategic plan period, identified key projects that work towards those goals and initiatives. And then as you saw this evening with the broadband committee update and the presentations, the board identified 4 key strategic initiatives that they asked staff to pursue and evaluate in terms of bringing more value to the community. The strategic planning process back in 2020 and 2021 identified a couple of key objectives. Engage community, board, and staff to bring value to our communities by focusing on resiliency and sustainability. Pioneer new ideas that could be applied and implemented. Partner with customers and communities to create efficient processes. Position the district for the future, understanding that the landscape of energy, water, the services we provided are ever changing, but position the district in a strategic position to capitalize on new opportunities. Focus on collaborative initiatives that will make a difference in our district and community. You saw that this evening. And then build a vibrant culture. Some of the processes utilized to accomplish these goals and initiatives, we started off by painting the landscape. It was answering the what and why. What do we do and why do we do it? And essentially, who do we do it for? As I mentioned earlier, we developed strategic levers, and these were action items that linked goals and initiatives to the district's mission. If we came up with new goals, projects, or initiatives, we really had to do an evaluation through these strategic levers to make sure that they ultimately tied back to our core mission. We performed an organizational SWOT analysis, really what were the opportunities and threats to our goals and initiatives and the larger strategic mission of the district. We engaged in an in-depth community outreach process, and this was 2-tiered. We had a very successful community-wide survey. We used Adam Probolski Consulting Services to engage with our community, much like Uptown Services presented earlier this evening, and really created some statistically valid data of what our community prioritizes, how they value the district services, and what was needed moving forward. And then in the midst of the COVID virtual environment, I thought it was very remarkable how the district pivoted quickly from kind of the community engagement, in the boardroom and the conference room in person, to facilitating Zoom rooms. There's a new term we learned. We got really proficient really quickly in the virtual environment and facilitated neighborhood focus groups where our community members could participate and engage in strategic topics that they were interested in and give feedback on their needs assessments. The process also included extensive staff development. We identified opportunities for both leadership and line staff for development and continuing to build a high-performing organization. And one of the key components we also engaged in was benchmarking. And this was the process of engaging our local, regional, and state partners to learn what best practices were for their organization. What were the lessons learned as it relates to our strategic goals and initiatives so that, one, the district doesn't repeat those lessons learned, and two, we can really get a better understanding of what is out there in the landscape with our other public partners. So we did some really great, again, Zoom meetings with our JPA partners in both electric and the water side of our operation, and really gain some value information and insight of what opportunities were out there. So the board adopted the strategic plan in May of 2021, and it was quickly incorporated into the fiscal year 22-23 budget. And I wanted to just kind of an act of reflection, point out a couple of the projects, the key projects that came out of the strategic plan that have been either successfully completed or in the process now. We had a safety component. Obviously, we talked about a lot over the last couple of months, the new outage management system. This was also a component of our enhanced community engagement. We got a lot of feedback from the community that they wanted more real-time information and accurate information so they could make their decisions here in our community in power outages or water supply issues. We enhanced our wildfire mitigation plan. We've reaped the rewards of that through our enhanced vegetation management and non-expulsionary fuses across our system that really help mitigate the risk for the district and being the ignition source for wildfires in our community. There's been a lot of focus and emphasis over the last couple of years in several projects, the fire protection districts, Measure T funds, the lessons learned across our state with other utilities. And so out of our strategic planning process, we really able to enhance and broaden our efforts in wildfire mitigation. Reliability was a key term that was brought up in multiple facets of our strategic planning process, both from the community, our staff, and the board. And so a couple of key projects out of that discussion and initiative were the pole replacement projects. We've enhanced those. We've been doing pole replacements based on pole age assessments and the kind of integrity of the poles out there in the system. We've enhanced that process and invested more resources to replace poles at an expedited rate. The Pioneer Pipeline Project and Booster Station Project that the board has been aware of and we've been working with in approval of several contracts in that brings more reliability to our water distribution system and in turn more access and storage for wildfire protection and fire flow. The Water Department is fully engaged in a tank rehabilitation project. This came out of the sustainability and reliability plan in the strategic plan. The district has, I believe, 32 water storage tanks spread across our distribution system, and those are critical in making sure we have fire flow supply and water supply for our community, and particularly when we have some power distribution issues, we have water supply already in key locations that we can still maintain water supply throughout our service territory. And then substation improvement projects. We've invested quite heavily over the last couple of years in the enhancement of the Truckee sub, the Donner Lake sub. We have in the schedules currently evaluating more work at the Mars Valley sub, and this is really replacing aging infrastructure with new infrastructure and more advanced infrastructure so that we can better, more effectively monitor and control our power resources. A couple of the key strategic initiatives you saw this evening: community-wide broadband initiative. Excited about the board's direction and guidance earlier this evening and how we'll proceed with that. We developed a couple of standing committees that really allowed community access to the process, something relatively new for the district and hadn't been utilized in the past, but it has been deemed really effective over the last couple of years. The stakeholder working group and the GM task force, same thing. And then, as you saw this evening, initial scoping study. So we're making progress on this initiative and well along our way. Local clean generation, the board's authorization, staff is engaged with the town and participating with an assessment, evaluation on the bioenergy plant that's been proposed. And then 100% clean renewable, staff is vigorously pursuing geothermal resource opportunities, both with our UAMPS partners and independently. The expansion of Horse Butte wind generation is an opportunity that we may capitalize here on in the near future. And in the Red Mesa Solar Project, expected to go online here in the coming weeks.
Is that an accurate statement?
The expectation is March, so we're not that far away.
Nice.
That was the kind of the deadline deliverable. So we'll give updates as they get closer to that. And so where we're at now with this, the strategic plan is well under its way. We've had a lot of success that we can report out of it, and we will continue working with this, but periodically it needs updates. And so we had a lot of great engagement, the board of directors and the general manager, in our review of 2021 and 2022. And what came out of those review meetings, kind of a performance evaluation and organizational performance evaluation, was a desire to really develop a more comprehensive process in the evaluation process, both in terms of a GM performance and in the organizational performance. We have the strategic plan, we have a district code, and we have budget. These are the three tenets of how we operate and what we operate from in terms of policy and strategy. And so in terms of continuing the organizational development, we need to build upon the 4 pillars that were established in the strategic plan. And that was the board of directors, the executive leadership team, employee development within the district, and community engagement. Those were the 4 pillars that we identified in the strategic plan. And so what does high-performing organization and that evaluation process look like? Really, it's broken down to a couple of key components: organizational leadership, which the board, the GM, the leadership team, and our supervisory and leadership staff throughout the organization are key to, instrumental to. Defining roles and responsibilities, communication and dialogue across the organization, development and sustainability of an organizational culture, and really what it comes down to at the end here is a collaborative evaluation process. And so after our discussions during our evaluation of the 2020 and 2021, and then the first part of 2022, coming out of those discussions, the board's feedback to me and ask was that we examine ways to develop a more comprehensive and defined evaluation process, really incorporate some workshop opportunities for board workshops and high-performing board development, crossing that with leadership development with staff, ELT, and the board, and really looking at updating and evaluating any necessary changes in our strategic plan. A lot changes in the work we do. We see the landscape changing quickly, and the energy generation resources, the way and means that those resources are delivered, supply chain issues, project development, economies, our ratepayer needs. A lot moves quickly. And so we had originally had a 4-year strategic plan. We're now entering 2023 at about the halfway point, and we're going to be presenting to the board for evaluation later this summer the fiscal year budget for 24 and 25. And so there's some overlap there that if we want to continue with the strategic plan, we need to fund it through budget. And that's part of that strategy and part of the board's purview in terms of policy and strategy. And so this is an opportune time for the board and staff to evaluate where we're at with the strategic plan, what adjustments need to be made, and how we want to move forward. What landscape do we want to paint for 2024 and beyond? Are the current strategic initiatives still relevant? Are we happy with where we're at along that progress or the process? And then what other strategic goals and projects is the board and the community interested in having this district pursue? And so with that feedback from the board to develop an evaluation plan and a high-performing board and leadership interaction or communication, I reached out to Pamela Hurt Associates, who was the consultant who facilitated the work we did with the last strategic plan and professional development projects, and requested a proposal on achieving these goals. And so just a quick background on Pamela Hurt Associates. They have extensive professional experience and background in organizational leadership development and strategic planning. Locally owned agency with extensive experience working in our community with both public and private stakeholders. successfully partnered with the district in the development of the current strategic plan, ability to leverage extensive work already completed with the district through this strategic planning process and our professional development process, and really has a unique approach in designing a collaborative evaluation process and really brings together some synergy between the board of directors, the elected, the general manager, and the executive leadership team. And I said they because in my engagement and reaching out to Pamela Hurd Associates, there's some additional resources, a new partner with Pamela Hurd Associates that has extensive experience in the public sector, having decades worth of work in organizational development, leadership, and team building. I've had an opportunity to engage with the new partner on a couple of circumstances and really, really excited about what they have to offer. So from this, Pamela Hurt Associates proposal included what we're terming as a General Manager 360 evaluation program. 360 evaluations aren't new, but this approach to it is innovative and exciting for, quite frankly, for what the opportunities it could provide for the district, not just with the GM evaluation, but organizational performance evaluation and across our leadership team and staff eventually. And so what does the 360 evaluation program seek to accomplish? Evaluation of leadership behaviors necessary for success, measurable outcomes, enhanced collaboration with the general manager, board of directors, and executive leadership teams, focus on continuing to develop a high-performing board and leadership team, personal and professional development and self-awareness, promotion of emotional intelligence, ensure self-evaluation across the organization, teamwork and collaboration for establishing cultural norms. The system builds in a quarterly update process with board of directors, GM, and staff. And this has repeatability and predictability. In other words, one of the challenges we had in establishing an evaluation process in the previous years was understanding exactly how that evaluation process works and what is being evaluated. And so this brings some predictability in terms of setting a program in place where each entity, the board, staff, the GM, understand the goals and expectations moving forward in a comprehensive format. And it allows some predictability there. Repeatability in terms of this is a template to be set in place for years to come. And as I mentioned before, kind of filtered throughout the organization as we start to develop and refine this process. And really, this is a cutting-edge approach for GM and leadership evaluations. It allows and provides and facilitates an opportunity for not just a direct report relationship, but a 360 relationship that gives the board of directors more access and understanding on the organization's evaluation of their performance as well. So the proposal includes a couple of key components on how this is accomplished over the process of development. First, the design and conceptual development phase, where we're really setting in place what the goals and what we're trying to achieve through this 360 process. Validation of these goals, defining them, and incorporating them into or making them in alignment with the strategic plan. Establishment and validation of the district board of priorities and focus areas. The evaluation process builds those in at the beginning so that the expectations are there across the course of a year or several years, or even across the strategic plan timeline. We'll establish several general manager evaluation workshops with the board and with the ELT. Execution of those evaluations over the course of the year, and finally at the end with a high-performing board and a high-performing ELT. We'll examine the evaluation results. The general manager creates a personal development plan based on those results and sets goals for 2024 or subsequent years. And then the board sets goals for the 2024 or, in this case, subsequent years beyond. taking place in alignment with and at the same time, and using those opportunities with our engagement and workshops to accomplish a couple of things. The General Manager 360 evaluation program, but also, as I mentioned earlier, aligning that with the strategic planning process, because key and fundamental to this is establishing goals and milestones for accomplishing those. And so concurrent with the 360 plan, the strategic plan update or reevaluation would take place. Again, revisiting the why we do what we do and who we do it for. Evaluate what the key components of a high-performing elected board through several workshops, the board of directors being integral in developing what that means. Updating the SWOT analysis. I think this is a key component that's done periodically to make sure that your strategic plan is in alignment with some of the risk and opportunities that develop over time. Revisit the board goals and their assumptions. Again, the assumptions change and have to be updated quite frequently. We just went through a COVID pandemic, and the paradigm shift was very dramatic in how agencies run and operate. We've talked about through staff presentations over the last several months that certain assumptions in project development or strategic plan development, like supply chain and contractor availability, those all change, and they're changing ever more rapidly as we move on. Update capital and departmental projects. As I spoke to earlier, we have goals to accomplish and a service to provide. I use the example, our water utility director, Chad Reed, that we brought on last year, did some evaluation with our engineering and leadership team on the capital improvement plan and came up with new means or ideas to accomplish the same thing through different types of projects. The budgets didn't change and the goals didn't change, but we have to reevaluate those processes, their plans. And, fundamental to plans are they need to be evaluated and changed periodically. And then do an additional market product analysis comparing data from previous strategies. This also includes updated benchmarking and kind of market analysis on what we need to consider that wasn't in front of us 2 years ago or 3 years ago. We'll examine the environmental social governance model. This was something new we introduced to the district in 2020 and 2021. And I have to say, I have a personal interest in this just simply because when we look at this model, it really, we all work in this public sector to serve a community. And when you use this model, it really illustrates all the boxes we need to check and when we have a new idea or new project or new plan to making sure that all of these critical tenets of what we do are satisfied. And we'll revisit that through the strategic planning process. Also, the board initiatives. We are on our way with community broadband. Do we want to reevaluate not the goal of clean energy, but perhaps how we approach it? Do we want to reevaluate local generation because of new information that's out there technologically and environmentally? And then the undergrounding of overhead infrastructure. It kind of falls in tandem with or in alignment with some of the economic data you saw or financial data with overhead broadband resources and what those costs are and compared to undergrounding. Is this something the community still wants us to pursue, or do we like to reprioritize to other things? We'll also engage other special districts, the town, and local stakeholders. This is key to any community-wide plan. And clearly, this would be integrated into the next fiscal year budget, 24-25. And then through the SWOT analysis, identify potential and real constraints for capital projects and board initiatives moving forward. This is what I was talking about, that the landscape is changing in terms of what challenges we faced. The board a couple of weeks ago authorized some leniency or latitude in specific procurements as it relates to transformers just because of the supply chain and the inability to gain real tangible or finite cost and delivery times. So things are changing. And so what risks or constraints do we have in future projects? So Pamela Hurt Associates has developed a proposal following some workshops I've had and meetings to kind of lay out what some of the specific needs came out of our board and GM evaluation processes. The proposal is for a comprehensive professional consulting contract. We broke it out into two nodes, so to speak. One is the general manager 360-degree performance plan. This proposal is in the amount of $131,000. And then two is, or section B here is phase 2 strategic plan update in the amount of $40,000. And the purpose for breaking those out independently is the strategic planning process is really an endeavor of staff, board, and community engagement. And we've gone through this process before, and we've really seen the effective use of some processes and tools there. The General Manager 360-degree performance plan or evaluation is more of a personnel matter and a strategic planning matter and board development matter. And so it has a lot more kind of, I don't want to word, I guess I would use the word flexibility or adaptability based on the board's needs and staff's needs during these early workshops. So I would envision that if a contract such as this was awarded and we move forward with Pamela Hurt Associates, as I'm recommending, that those initial board workshops and staff workshops will really identify the details in terms of what programs and processes we put in place moving forward, and what kind of workshops we need to develop and what kind of engagement we need to develop. So there's a not to exceed recommendation here of $131,000, but following those initial board meetings and workshops, we can develop that and tailor it. The phase 2 strategic planning update is a little more kind of tangible. It's going through those steps and processes and community engagement, and while it'll take place at the same time in tandem, it'll be a separate project, so to speak. So the total recommendation is an authorization for a not to exceed amount of $171,000. The fiscal impact, the fiscal year 22-23 adopted budget includes sufficient funds within the Board of Directors Strategic Planning Initiatives budget and the General Manager Professional Services budget. Earlier this evening, you saw Uptown Services. That contract had an amount of $79,000. We had a budget amount of $180,000 for strategic initiatives for fiscal year 22. 23, we have the same thing, $180,000 plus a general manager professional services budget. There's more than sufficient funds in both those budgets to account for this project. So staff recommendation this evening is to authorize the general manager to execute a professional services contract and all necessary agreements with Pamela Hurt Associates for the general manager 360-degree performance plan in the amount of $131,000 and phase 2 strategic plan update in the amount of $40,000 for a total authorization amount not to exceed $171,000. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Brian. Any online public comment for us? And is there any in-person public comment? All right.
No, Mr. President.
All right, no
Thank
public
you.
comment. All right. Krista Finn.
I'm good. I feel like I have also worked with Pamela Hurt, obviously, in the past several years. I've enjoyed the work. I think it was extremely productive, and I think the proof is in the pudding with how this organization is operating right now. There have been a lot of changes in the past 2 years, and I think we can really pull from the strategic plan and the training that went into that. So I don't have any questions.
Great. Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, for the thorough presentation. I think it's, while you provide a lot of information, I think there's still a lot of work to be done as well. And I think you've kind of highlighted the fact that this is is going to be somewhat of an organic process to get, the strategic plan. You're right, it's more, that vision's a little more clear. I think the 360 plan vision isn't as clear the concepts, the ideas, the goals, I think, are fairly clear, but this being pretty new for all of us, I think is, I won't say there's some trepidation, but I think if I'm understanding the way you presented it, is the initial workshops will kind of help bring into more clarity what it is our goals will be, and what the product will kind of look like, and then how to build those, us and the board, us and the review process into a sort of a living and working document and process for not only us to evaluate you, but for you to evaluate the ELT, and even taking those concepts, and even pushing those further down into evaluating staff.
I just also want to pipe in and to help us evaluate ourselves, like help
Yes,
us to be a
thank
better
you.
board. We
Yeah.
need to
No,
practice
so,
these
yeah,
things.
not only are we looking at providing some of those performance plan initiatives for evaluation of staff, but also of ourselves, like having, how to have frank conversations, how to have, how to be a higher performing board, how to really communicate with each other at a level that's productive and efficient and, means something to the public. So I feel like we're making a decision tonight to engage the services of Pamela Hurt and Associates. We're not necessarily committing to, those are not to exceed values. This is a dynamic process, and so my feeling is what we're approving tonight is sort of the kickoff phase of this process. That's how I would summarize what I'm looking at.
Great. Kim?
Okay. I had requested a copy of the contract from Brian and also a copy of the proposal from Brian. I ran here on transparency, and I feel that just I'm not 100% sure of what we're purchasing for $131,000 for the 360 evaluation. The $40,000, that seems reasonable. I do have a question. Did you only meet with Pam, or I know you always kind of referred to it as Pamela Hurt and Associates, but was it just Pam, or does she also have a staff member?
I met with Pam Homday.
Okay. And then the term of the contract is how long?
We haven't established a contract, so this is, the action before you this evening is to authorize the not to exceed expenditure amount. It's essentially, as typical with professional consulting services, I work with the consultants or consultants if we're working with several proposals. In this case, in my discussions with the board, there was support of moving forward with Pamela Hurt Associates for consideration. And so I engaged with her. We developed a draft plan. These are currently working documents that I have for both evaluation of my staff and to propose to the board in terms of structure of evaluation in future meetings. And so the proposal is a draft form and really trying to assess what type of funding authorization would be needed to accomplish all of the goals that I identified coming out of our meetings during our evaluation. And so as Director Laliotis pointed out, it's a not to exceed authorization. As the board engages in these workshops and we developed the processes along the way to achieve each of these goals with Pamela as a consultant and her partners, like it has happened with several other contracts with other agencies, you may spend less because you cut certain things out, or you may spend more, and we have to come back and extend the authorization to be more. A good example earlier, Uptown Services was a more finite consulting service. There were specific deliverables, tasks that were completed, and they completed under budget. We do have additional expenditure, But based on the feedback this evening, we may come back to the board looking for additional authorization to continue that work. Same process would happen during a consulting services over the course of the next year, and we develop this review process and the strategic plan update. The board may find this process so valuable and lead to other development, and we expand that contract. So what I'm presenting to you after my meeting with Pam is looking for an authorization that at a minimum could achieve the goals that I laid out to achieve over the next 12 months.
Is there a plan to have Steve review the contracts and agreements?
We use boilerplate professional services contract agreements that have been reviewed by district council. They are the same that we have used for many years.
I would like to have Steve look over the final agreement, whatever, if it passes, the final agreement, and have his once-over to ensure that the district's being protected. I still am struggling with the scope of it. And the other thing is that there was really not a lot of mention that this is a public water and electric company, and I feel like some of those items that are important, there's a lot of items important to the district through the strategic plan, but there's also a wide variety of important topics as it applies to public and water. And I feel that there are professional organizations such as UAMPS or other professional organizations like that that may have vendors that have 360 evaluation performance plans that may be beneficial to get a new, that have that element too, that would be able to bring in what our district has done, and also kind of branch out and include the public and the public water and electric service element of it. So I feel like we're kind of missing out a little bit on that. But I'm struggling that, the $171,000, that's what I paid for my house when I bought it, 20 years ago. And with that, we did a pest inspection. We had, a carpenter come in and take a look and do the full house inspection. There were a lot of checks and balances on what we're purchasing for that amount of money. And for this amount of money, I feel like you repeated a lot of the information that we already know, that we all benefited from with the whole strategic plan process, and talked about moving it forward, but I just don't feel like that there's enough meat in there for me to approve the additional $131,000. So with that, I would propose that we move forward with Pam for the strategic plan update amount for $40,000, but basically go out to bid with an RFP. I think you have a wonderful list of goals, and go out to RFP for the process for the 360-degree performance plan.
If I might add a comment, just
absolutely, Brian.
to reassure the board, the process that we went through in terms of developing the strategic plan in 2020 and 2021 included nothing but the engagement with the public and public water and electric services, and that will continue. The fundamental goal here for this process, for both the 360 evaluation and the strategic plan update, is to ensure that this community has a high-performing organization to deliver the services that we've been tasked with providing and maintaining for years to come. And part of that is the development of a strategic plan that is not only deliverable, but is achieved through an organization that's at a high-performing level. The board has established the goal for me as general manager to ensure that we go beyond just status quo and that we develop programs and initiatives at the board's guidance that bring into this community things like electric efficiency, water efficiency, resource sustainability, workforce sustainability, and at a reasonable and responsible cost. Understanding that consulting services the cost can be, they can vary widely. We just saw a consulting services contract earlier from Uptown that was $80,000. That was for a couple months' work, and it was great work that was done. Other consulting services take a longer time, and this is a not to exceed amount to make sure that we have enough authorization to go through this process as I am proposing to this board of directors. As I mentioned, once we have the opportunity to set these workshops, this board has a participating and contributing role in what this 360 plan looks like. Coming out of our evaluations last time, the ask from the board was there wasn't a quite clear understanding of what gets evaluated, how it gets evaluated, and what the roles and responsibilities were for the board of directors, the GM, and ELT. I think we put together an opportunity here that the board would be very pleased with, and that would be a very effective process and project for this district. And fundamental to it all is the effective and efficient delivery of the resources that we are stewards of.
Yeah, I can't argue with the amount. It is a lot of money, but putting in perspective with other consultants, it is within the ballpark. Brian, would you mind just putting back the 360? You had 2 pages of the 360 list. Oh, okay, yeah. So it's a pretty big scope, and it really overlaps a lot with the strategic plan. And just that strategic plan process just was really, for me personally, it was huge. Just really becoming that higher level board member, listening, discussion, what came out of it with us as a board. You weren't on it yet, but so you didn't get to feel that. But it was pretty.
They're pretty early in on it.
But through the guts of it, that creation of it, it was pretty amazing. And then I think the result of that was, okay, what are we going to do with these things? These 4 items that we selected, and one of the results of that is what we just saw here tonight, with a lot of members of the public in a majority support for broadband. And I've just been really hesitant. We talked about it a long time ago, almost 20 years ago, kind of died. And now there's just a lot of just need for it, like there was for an electric district in the 1920s for a light on the hill. We've got to do something to provide for the community, to take the community to the next level, for education for our kids, for development and work of us who live here and have second homes here. So to me, it's really big. I just get excited about this, and I see the price, and it's expensive, but like we paid $40,000-$50,000 for a recruiting firm, and it's like, wow, that was just like one guy over a few month period of time. And if you just kind of do the monthly math for that, and you spread this out over 9 months or 12 months, and it really fits in to the gut check of where that cost should be. And the value that came out of that strategic planning process was just, I get fired up. I get super stoked about it. So, and being here in person just makes it that much better.
Yeah, that's right.
So I want to do that. I really want to just dive in with the board, with the ELT, with the community, and just create and update the strategic plan and dive into this and really become a better working board together and communicate with each other and be able to have these open conversations with each other and accomplish big things, because $120 million is not small. You know, and if we're going to want to do that, we need to be working together as a team to accomplish these big things. So,
Yeah, it feels good to plan and to think ahead and to accomplish things.
Right.
And make this community a better community. And I also think there's, a lot of this work is Brian. It's work with the executive leadership team and the GM. And I think you getting to decide who you want to work with for these really important goals is important. You know, you have a good relationship with Pam Hobday, and that really helps these processes to even better outcomes, right? Like that is meaningful, that part of this puzzle. And I also paid $150,000 for my house 20 years ago, but today it's worth $750.
Go figure.
Go figure, exactly.
what's happened?
It's crazy. It is crazy.
And I don't think you're not agreeing with a lot of the things that are being said. I think your concern is not so much the cost, but the fact that we're just zeroing in on one consultant. And I hear you, and I think you have a valid point. From my perspective, I see what, I have spent many hours with Pam and through her engagement processes with not only the public, but with ELT, with groups, and I feel she and her firm are 100% qualified to do this work. In my opinion, based on our experience with her and her group and what products she's brought forth through the district over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, I feel comfortable moving forward with the contract. But as I said, I hear what you're saying. And I do believe you are, everything else that was said is why we're doing this, and I think you agree with that. But I just want to recognize that I understand what you're saying, and how I feel is different from that perspective based on my experiences over the last several years working with Pam and her group.
I do want to say that however the vote is going, which I have a feeling it will be passing, that whatever is put in front of me as a board member, absolutely I'll jump in with both feet, and I will participate 100%.
Thank you. That's a valuable statement.
Brian, do you want to put it, I guess, we're all kind of silent?
No, I'm pretending I'm president again.
Oh, okay. No.
But I'm turning off my mic.
Yeah. Yeah, I pause a little bit more, just want to make sure we're there.
There is a recommendation for the board's consideration this evening. I can definitely answer more questions if need be.
I'll move staff's recommendation.
Oh, there you go.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Shauna, could we have roll call, please?
Thank you. Director Finn.
Yes.
Director Harris.
No.
Vice President Laliotis.
Yes.
President Bender.
Yes.
The record will note Joe was absent.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Director Aguirre.
Director Aguirre. Okay. Thank you very much for that presentation, and we are, let's see, I need to find the
The
second.
broadband survey's next.
Just kidding.
Okay, routine business, approve the treasurer's report, January 18th, 2023. We have two items, A and B, the fund balances and disbursements. Any public comment? If no? No. Is there a motion?
I'll be Joe, and I move that we pay the bills.
Thank you.
I'll second.
All right. Roll call, please.
Director Finn.
Yes.
Director Harris.
Yes.
Vice President Laliotis.
Yes.
President Bender.
Yes.
The record will note Director Aguirre is absent.
Thank you. Okay, we've got some minutes from Pearl Harbor Day 2022.
Public comment?
Yeah, is there public comment?
No, Mr. President.
Okay. Any comments on those minutes from end of last year? Is there a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes for December 7th, 2022.
I second.
Okay, roll call, please.
Thank you, Director Finn.
Yes.
Director Harris.
Yes.
Vice President Laliotis.
Yes.
President Bender.
Yes.
The record will note Director Aguirre is absent.
Thank you. And the next item on the agenda is adjournment.
It's only 9:52.
Yeah.
And 8 seconds.
Start out the meeting.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.